Chapter 1. As soon as Ning Shu opened her eyes, she was slapped in the face. A noisy voice exploded in her ears. "Are you awake? Why did you take so long this time? Could it be that Miss Ning took things too hard and fell into a deep sleep? However, he died a little too miserably in this life. Look at his torn skin and flesh, it's too ugly." The slap caused Ning Shu to hit the back of her head on the 3-life stone. She almost fainted again. In her daze, she thought, "Here we go again. How many times have I died? Miss Ning, Miss Ning." A ghastly white bone claw swayed in front of her eyes as it cried out, "Oh no, don't tell me you've become stupid from all the dying." Ning Shu weakly slapped away the overly lively bone claw and gave him a scary smile. "Dying won't make you stupid. It will only get better and better. Why don't you give it a try?" Dendrobium was a new ghost servant who had only been in office for 100 years. He had only died once. He was frightened by her terrifying joke and shook his head. Ning Shu sat up on the 3-life stone. "Do you have any food? I didn't eat anything for 4 to 5 days before I died. I'm so hungry that I'm dizzy." "You're already dead. Why are you still hungry? I've never seen a ghost in hell that wants to eat. If you're really hungry, here." Dendrobium raised his bony bone claw in front of her. "Why don't you just take a bite or two?" Ning Shu pretended to bite him. Dendrobium was so scared that he quickly retracted his arm. This lady even dares to peek at the king of hell when he's bathing. What else is she afraid of? "Don't let me bite you." Ning Shu shrugged her shoulders in pity. She bent down and picked a red spider lily and put it into her mouth. "This is the bad thing about being a ghost. There's no taste in your mouth. It tastes terrible." Dendrobium giggled as he followed behind her and continued to chatter. "How did you die this time?" Ning Shu stared at the 3-live stone, which was as white as jade and flowing with light. Her face and body were badly mangled, and the bright red color was even more terrifying than the evil ghosts of the 18th level of the underworld. Ning Shu herself was shocked. She almost became the first ghost to die because of her own ugliness. "Ayaya, I'm scared to death. I didn't feel this scary when I was being executed by 1,000 cuts. What a pity for my beautiful face." Fortunately, the 3-live stone emitted a faint light. Accompanied by that light, the thousands of bloody wounds on her body healed at a speed visible to the naked eye. In the end, she returned to being a beautiful woman with picturesque features. She curled her lips into a charming smile. On the side, the old ghosts who had lined up on the Bridge of Helplessness for more than 10 years all climbed onto the bridge railings and poked their heads out to look. "Who is she? How could she be so beautiful? I don't know. I heard the ghost constables call her Miss Ning." The male ghost at the front of the line twisted his head around in boredom. His neck was almost broken when he was pushed aside by a female ghost who was wearing red and green and had a long tongue. The female ghost dipped her finger into the bloody hole in the chest of a nearby ghost soldier and used it as rouge for herself. "So it's the legendary Miss Ning of the underworld. Did she die again and come back? Let me think, when I was lining up here, she had only died 4 times. 4, 5, 6, this is the 6th time, right? 7. Other ghosts, what? This is the 7th time." Meng Po scooped a bowl of soup and threw it on the table, yawning lazily. And every time, she refused to drink Meng Po's soup. The ghosts were instantly attracted. No one wanted to fight for Meng Po's soup. They all crowded in front of Meng Po. 7 times? Last time, that heinous demoness was punished by the heavenly Tao for 3 lifetimes. Then how evil must she be to be tortured by the heavenly Tao like this? That's right, that's right. How did she die? Meng Po took out her pipe and knocked it hard on the Bridge of Helplessness. Then, she brought it to her lips. In the 2nd life, she was a peony in that person's courtyard. That person pinched it and stuck it in his beloved's hair. His beloved thought that the flower was too ugly and threw it into a swamp. In the 3rd life, she was a spirit deer. She was killed by an arrow and made into that person's clothes. In the 4th life, she was a dog raised by that person. When there was a famine, she was beaten to death and skinned by that person. The ghosts smacked their lips. That's too tragic. In the 5th life, she was reincarnated as a snow fox. She was bought by that person and served well for several years. The ghosts commented, "That's not bad. It's not bad." Meng Po's lips curled up. She suddenly opened her bloody mouth and bared her fangs, revealing a sinister smile. Then, she was skinned alive. Starting from her hind legs, up to her abdomen, ears, eyes, mouth, nose, all the way to the top of her head. She was skinned until she was half dead. Finally, she was given to her beloved to make into a scarf. The cowardly ghosts hurriedly covered their heads and scurried away. The other ghosts were also frightened to the bone. Not far away, Ning Shu rested her chin on her hand and winked at Meng Po. Meng Po retracted her fangs and continued to speak slowly. It wasn't easy for her to be reincarnated as a human in her 7th life. She became a beggar on the roadside and was taken home by that person to be a servant. However, that person's family rebelled and left her as bait. In the end, she was cut into pieces and executed by 1,000 cuts. Some ghosts were curious. What about the first life? How did she die? Suddenly, they saw a wooden boat slowly approaching from the end of the river of forgetfulness. On the wooden boat, there was a slender figure standing behind a screen. His appearance couldn't be seen clearly. They could only see a purple mark faintly glowing between his eyebrows. His black hair was like jade as it drooped down to his feet. His surroundings carried a supreme nobility and pressure. Behind him, 2 legless ghosts, one black and one white, respectfully floated behind him. The ghosts all lowered their heads and stood properly, not daring to gossip. "It seems that the time has come." Ning Shu pursed her lips as if she hadn't heard enough. "It's a pity that I haven't finished listening." She clapped her hands and jumped down from the 3 live stone. Looking at King Chujiang, who was shrouded in thick fog, she jokingly said, "Your Highness King Chujiang, I owed him 7 lives and have already repaid 6. Now, this should be the last time, right? In the future, you don't have to worry about ghosts being bold enough to peek at your sleep." The eyes of the ghosts all lit up. This Miss Ning was indeed not a ghost. Not only did she die brilliantly, she even dared to peek at King Chujiang while he was sleeping. Admirable! Admirable! At the side, Dendrobium hurriedly pounced over to cover her mouth. Among the 10 kings of hell, only this King Chujiang was the coldest and most solemn. His appearance, however, was rumored to be the most handsome in the world. It was said that on the day he was sent from the heavenly realm to the underworld, many female ghosts fought to see his true appearance. They didn't even fear falling from the bridge of helplessness into the river of forgetfulness. However, no matter how handsome he was, it was only a legend. Those who really saw his appearance had 2 endings: either they sought death, or they were personally killed by him. Only this Miss Ning had nothing to do after she died. There were a few times when she sneaked a peek at his peerless appearance. Dendrobium remembered that when she died for the 4th time, her entire body was in pain and she couldn't get rid of it. Dendrobium secretly brought her to stroll around the underworld. He didn't expect that Miss Ning would sneak into King Chu's palace without anyone noticing. At that time, King Chujiang was resting. She almost broke through his concealment and saw his true appearance. Dendrobium was scared half to death. He sighed that fortunately, it was so close. At the side, Ning Shu felt that it was a pity. Why was it so close? Since then, this Miss Ning became even more lawless. After she died for the 5th time, she came back saying that she had just been skinned and felt uncomfortable all over. She wanted to treat her injuries alone. Then, she turned around and sneaked into the Chu royal palace. Coincidentally, she saw King Chujiang bathing. After she died for the 6th time, she still didn't see a ghost. Then, she ran to the Chu royal palace and pretended to be a servant girl, wanting to change King Chujiang's clothes. This was the first time Dendrobium felt that a ghost's life was so difficult. However, it was strange. King Chujiang, who had always been solemn and cold like ice, actually didn't punish her. Instead, he let her off lightly. This made Dendrobium and the ghost servants of the underworld dumbfounded. They said 3 times, "Strange, strange, strange." In an instant, the whole underworld was filled with gossip. Could it be that between King Chujiang and Miss Ning, pushing Dendrobium away, Ning Shu blinked her eyes and said with a natural charm, You really don't intend to satisfy my last curiosity and let me take a look? She quietly took a step forward. All the ghosts were drooling. King Chujiang was silent. Ning Shu frowned and gave in awkwardly. If you won't let me see your face, then, let me see your hands. She took another step forward. King Chujiang was still indifferent. Ning Shu hesitated for a long time before retreating to the bottom line. Why don't I close my eyes and touch it? She took a step forward and arrived in front of King Chujiang, attempting to pounce on him. King Chujiang moved his finger and used the 1,000 Li technique. Ning Shu was bounced back to her original spot. All the ghosts fell down. King Chujiang was still silent. Only his fluttering clothes fluttered in the wind of the river of forgetfulness for thousands of years. Only Ning Shu still shrugged her shoulders shamelessly. You are really as boring as a day in 100 years. In this life, am I a human, an animal, or a flower? King Chujiang stood in front of her and seemed to be carefully looking at her. Human. His voice was like the sound of Buddha descending from the 9th heaven, causing all the female ghosts to feel numb. Male or female? Female. Noble or poor? Noble beyond compare. Ning Shu smiled. That is a great thing. It doesn't have to be noble beyond compare. As long as you don't have to worry about food and clothing, you don't have to worry about anything. You can just peacefully be a rich and idle person, eating and waiting for death. Just thinking about it makes me impatient. Let's go. She walked halfway and suddenly had the thought of teasing him. That's right, do I have a husband in this life? Is it enough for your Highness's handsomeness? Is it enough for your Highness's beauty? Is it enough for your Highness's intelligence, ability, gentleness, and understanding? If it's not enough, I might as well be a widow. King Chujiang paused for a moment, as if he couldn't take it anymore. After a moment, he said in a deep voice, It's enough, it's all enough. Finally getting some fun out of him before leaving, Ning Shu laughed uncontrollably. She waved her hand at the dendrobium and turned to walk into the river of forgetfulness. The river of forgetfulness's water seemed to have a soul and was about to drown her in an instant. However, King Chujiang suddenly bit his finger. Dark red beads of blood gushed out from his deathly white fingertip and instantly entered the 3 live stone. Your Highness. What are you doing? The black and white deities were shocked. King Chujiang closed his eyes and didn't answer. He muttered a spell and purple light burst out from between his brows. Countless amounts of blood gushed out from his body and dyed the 3 live stone red. Instantly, the river of forgetfulness turned into a sea of blood. The waves surged to the sky and the entire Yama palace shook, turning into a mess. You. Ning Shu was stunned. A dark red bead of blood suddenly dripped onto her forehead. Lady Ning. The dendrobium rushed to the riverside and shouted. Ning Shu's figure had already sunk into the river of forgetfulness. The bewitching red color quickly returned to normal. When he turned back, King Chujiang had also disappeared. Only a voice was left hovering in the sky of the underworld. 300 years ago, because of my mistake, I changed your fate and caused you and Emperor Xiao Yuni to become enemies. I caused millions of corpses and rivers of blood to flow. I incurred the wrath of the heavens and punished you to die miserably for 7 lifetimes. I have nothing else to repay you, so I will use my 1,000 years of cultivation to return you a lifetime of happiness and peace. Chapter 2. Ning Shu was slapped again. Then, she sat in the pile of dowry and sulked. Half of her face was as beautiful as snow jade while the other half had a bright red palm print on it. It complemented her fiery red wedding dress, making for a spectacular sight. Behind her sedan chair, the most scholarly young master of the imperial censor in the capital was crying while coughing blood. Sister Shu, I, Cloud Leaf, will marry no one but you. Even if I die from coughing blood, I am willing. He chased for 100 steps and shouted, Sister Shu. He spat out a mouthful of blood and fell to the ground, unconscious. The maidservant Forsythia looked behind the sedan chair and said softly, Miss, young Master Yun vomited blood and fainted again. Do you want to stop and take a look? After all, you are husband and wife for a joss stick's time. Ning Shu did not care about her manners and rolled her eyes. Take a look. Take a look, my ass. One had to know that the wife of the imperial censor came from a family of generals. If she dared to stop and curse young Master Yun to death, it would not be as simple as a slap. She would be skinned alive. Thinking of this, she became even angrier. King Chujiang, O King Chujiang, is this the unattainable honor that you promised me? This lady thanks the entire netherworld. On the Vermilion Bird Avenue, hundreds of people gathered by the roadside to watch. How many is this? This is the third one. This Ning family's eldest young miss-husband curse has reached another level. Isn't that so? The first husband lasted for half a year before dying, the second one did not even last a month. This one is even more impressive. Just as they were about to go through the wedding ceremony, the fine young master of the imperial censor suddenly vomited blood. The wife of the imperial censor immediately broke off the engagement and asked Lady Ning to pack her dowry and scram. Impressive, impressive. She is indeed the Great Yu's #1 wife curse general. We should ask His Majesty to send her to the front line. I guarantee that in less than half a year, the enemy's army of 100,000 will be dead. Ha ha ha. Listening to the discussions outside the sedan chair, Ning Shu's face darkened, especially the half of her face that was covered by the slap. When she stepped into the river of forgetfulness, she never would have thought that King Chujiang would act on his own initiative and actually arrange for her to return to her first life. In that life, she was born in Duke Ning. Her mother was Princess Hashin, who was conferred the title of Princess Hashin by the late emperor. Before she was 10 years old, she enjoyed the love of her parents. She was the most precious pearl in the family. When she was 10 years old, a crazy taroist performed a divination outside her family. He said that her fate was hard to come by in the world. Before she was 17 years old, she had to marry the most noble person in the world. Otherwise, not only would she die, but she would also die. Even the aristocratic families she was close to would not be spared. They only thought that the Daoist was spouting nonsense and no one took him seriously. Unexpectedly, when she was 17, her father was suddenly framed for treason and sentenced to the execution of his entire family. She had personally witnessed her parents being beheaded right in front of her eyes. Fortunately, the sixth prince, Xiao Yuni, had arrived in time to clear her family's name and save her grandmother and siblings. She remembered that it was that day when that thin but handsome youth gently wiped away the tears on her face and said softly, "Shu-er, I know that you must be very sad in your heart. But don't be afraid, Yangage will be your home in the future." Then, she was completely bewitched by him and walked onto the path of eternal damnation. In this life, she did not know what that King Chujiang did to make her return to the age of marriageable age. Unwilling to get on Xiao Yuni's pirate ship and unwilling to drag the entire family down with her, Ning Shu gritted her teeth and made a prompt decision to ask her father for permission. She said that no matter which family's young master was willing to marry her, even if he was crippled and retarded, she would marry him. Lord Ning had doted on this pearl since childhood and would not casually marry anyone. The first time, he chose the eldest son of the country's great general's family. Everyone said that the eldest son was handsome and skilled in both civil and military matters. At the age of 15, he had followed his father to war and had achieved many military achievements. The two families discussed and decided to get engaged first, and when the eldest son returned, they would immediately get married. Who would have thought that half a year later, the eldest son would die on the battlefield without leaving behind a corpse? From then on, her reputation of jinxing her husband began to spread. The second time, her father took a fancy to the youngest son of Lu Bohu's family. Although the youngest son was not the legitimate son of the eldest son, he was a famous and elegant young master in the capital. Even the Grand Tutor had said that he was the son of Lu Bohu. However, the House of Marquis had long heard of her rumors and was hesitant to agree. Lord Ning specially went to the House of Marquis to make a request and promised 500 sets of dowry. He also asked the Empress Dowager to act as the matchmaker before the House of Marquis finally agreed. However, for some reason, before the wedding ceremony, the youngest son suddenly fell seriously ill and passed away after a month of illness. The news of her jinxing her husband was confirmed. No matter how her father begged, no aristocratic family was willing to marry her. Until she turned 16 this year. Madame Ning was afraid that her worry would harm her health, so she ordered her to go to Peach Blossom Mountain to enjoy the flowers and relax. Who would have thought that she would coincidentally meet young Master Yoon from the House of Censors? Young Master Yoon was infatuated the moment he saw her and swore to marry her. How could the House of Censors allow their son to die? However, young Master Yoon was stubborn. He went on hunger strikes several times to commit suicide, forcing her parents to nod with tears in their eyes. Then, the whole capital knew about it. In less than the time it takes to burn a stick of incense, she was slapped and sent home. She also had a new title, Great Yu's first jinxing female general. Duke Ning and Duke Ning's wife saw the bridal sedan being lifted back and their eyes reddened. They turned around and secretly wiped their tears. Ning Shu chewed that King Chujiang 10,000 times in her heart. After sorting out her emotions, she smiled and comforted her parents softly. Father, mother, if you don't want to marry, then don't marry. From now on, Shu will serve you wholeheartedly. There will be less worries. Ning Deyuan glared. How can you not marry? Shu, don't worry. With father here, I will definitely find you a good husband in this life. Her mother and Princess Xin wiped their tears and said hesitantly, why don't mother go and beg the Empress Dowager again? The most noble people in this world are not just the civil and military Lord Fortune Star. No matter how noble they are, they can't be more noble than the imperial family. Ning Shu's head immediately became as big as a bull. Mother. Daughter said that I would rather commit suicide at the age of 17 than marry into the imperial family in this life. As soon as she finished speaking, she heard a servant report, His Highness the Sixth Prince has arrived. Ning Shu felt like her back was on pins and needles. She immediately turned around to leave, but she was stopped by someone. The figure wearing a moon-white robe with golden threads blocked her way with a face full of anger. Why would you commit suicide rather than marry this prince? The young man's face was thin and handsome, with the unique arrogance of an imperial family. Even if he was angry, half of the women in the capital fell in love with him. Not to mention, at this moment, there was indeed deep affection in his eyes. Unable to avoid this god of plague, Ning Shu patiently smiled. His Highness the Sixth Prince, don't worry. Wait another 2 years. At this time 2 years later, you will accidentally roll off a cliff during the spring hunt and be attacked by an assassin. A beautiful woman called Fail Wan will save you and she almost lost her life for you. From then on, you two will fall in love with each other and live together as a couple, living together like an immortal couple. In that life, he used her as a shield for this singer called Fail Wan. It was only until she used up all the power of the Duke's family to help him ascend the throne that he slowly opened his mouth to bring Fail Wan into the palace and made her the empress, while she was demoted to a palace maid. Her brother, Ji couldn't stand it anymore and impulsively killed Fail Wan. Xiao Yuni was furious, and from then on, they completely broke off their relationship and became enemies. When Fail Wan's name was mentioned again, she didn't think that she would be so calm. It was as if the strong love and hatred in that life, those bone-deep injuries, had all disappeared unknowingly. She knew that King Chujiang's intention was to make up for it, but after 300 years, 7 lives of suffering, how could she pretend that those things didn't happen and continue to be on the same level as Xiao Yuni? The best ending for them was for him to walk his path and she to walk her own path, without entanglement in this life. She was trying to persuade him, but Xiao Yuni's expression became uglier. Shu, you don't have to talk nonsense to make me back down. The young prince's heart was higher than the sky. How could he stand being rejected again and again? He clenched his fists, his veins popping, and fiercely said to Ning Shu, whether you're willing to marry or not, I'll go ask father to give an edict now, the wedding will be in a month. I said before, you can only marry me as a concubine in this life. Others are delusional. Don't even think about it. After that, he flicked his sleeves and left. Ning Shu's head was about to explode. Ayaya, how could this damn child be so stupid? As the future emperor, he had the temper of a child who didn't follow his wishes. This great Yu was doomed. Chapter 3. When the 500 sets of red satin dowries were carried out this morning, the joy and anticipation on her parents' faces was equal to the sadness and anxiety they felt now. Ning Shu used all her strength to coax them and send them back to the courtyard to rest. Forsythia quickly went forward to help remove the extremely heavy phoenix coronet on Ning-Shu's head. She helped Ning-Shu to the dressing table and carefully combed Ning-Shu's long hair in front of the bronze mirror. In the mirror, the young lady in the fiery red wedding dress had skin as white as snow. Forsythia thought she was even more beautiful than the fairies of the 9 heavens. It was a pity that young Master Yoon did not have the fortune. She hesitated for a long time and could not help but say, "Young miss, this servant does not understand." "What do you not understand?" Ning-Shu concentrated on rubbing her neck that was almost crushed and opened her mouth absent-mindedly. "His Highness the 6th Prince's appearance is one of the best in the entire Great Yu Empire. Many young ladies in the capital are eagerly looking at him. Although he is not a legitimate prince, he has always been raised by the Empress. His future is indescribable and His Highness has always been so attentive to you. Even this servant can see that kind of intention. Why don't you like it?" Forsythia said and muttered softly, "Let's not talk about others. That one from the first branch has always been staring at His Highness the 6th Prince as if she can't wait to pounce on him." She was talking about second young Miss Ning Wan. Since childhood, she liked to snatch things from Ning-Shu. When she grew up, she even wanted to snatch men. Forsythia served by Ning-Shu's side since she was young and naturally sided with Ning-Shu wholeheartedly. Therefore, she could not bear to see Ning-Shu pretending to be pitiful when she was obviously jealous. Ning-Shu suddenly smiled. She was born extremely beautiful. Today, she was even more beautiful. Her eyes were curved and radiant. "My good Forsythia, do you know that the most beautiful mushroom in the world is the most poisonous one? If you accidentally took the first bite of this mushroom, it was an unintentional mistake. Quickly spit it out. But if you know it is poisonous and still eat it, then you deserve to die." Moreover, in the bronze mirror, Ning-Shu gently lowered her feathered eyelashes, her fingertips touching the phoenix coronet that she had worn 3 times. "How can the promise of youth be taken seriously? With my current reputation, even if he wants to marry me, His Majesty won't agree, and the Empress won't either. Unless he is willing to give up his position and cut off from his bright future." But was that possible? Ning-Shu did not even think about it. Even if he was willing, she would not. She gently touched her swollen cheek. "TSK, don't bother about His Highness. Your miss is about to die from the pain. Miss Ning, of Yoon of Ning, Yoon of Ning of Young of Ning, young miss, this servant's is young misses." Forsythia picked up her skirt and hurried out. Ning-Shu dismissed her attendants and sat in front of the dressing table. She took out a small whistle from the deepest part of the dressing box and blew it softly. A moment later, the small window made a slight noise, and a black figure quietly appeared in the room. The person who came was a woman dressed in tight clothes. Her name was Zigui, and she was a secret guard that her father had sent to her. She looked to be about 17 or 18 years old, and her movements were nimble. She was as cold and elegant as a bamboo after the rain. Zigui knelt on one knee and said guiltily, "This subordinate was negligent and did not stop Madame Yoon at the imperial censor manor, causing her to injure Miss. Please punish me." Ning-Shu chuckled and stopped her. "It doesn't matter. It happened so suddenly. It's not your fault. Moreover, if I hadn't received that slap from Madame Yoon at that time to appease her anger, I'm afraid there would have been no end to it. Zigui, I have something more important for you to do. Miss, please give me your orders." Ning-Shu said softly, "Go guard the Yoon Manor for me. Secretly find out everything about the manor's situation." Zigui frowned and pondered. "Miss, are you suspecting that there's a problem with young Master Yoon's illness?" "Whether there's a problem or not, we'll only know after investigating," Ning-Shu said indifferently. In those long 7 reincarnations, there wasn't a moment that she didn't think about how her father, Ning De-Yuan, had always won the Emperor's heart and was entrusted with an important task by His Majesty. That trust was accumulated over decades, so how could it collapse overnight like a sand castle and end up with the execution of the entire family? Even if it was fate, it still needed someone to do it. Someone must have secretly framed him. In that lifetime, she didn't find out the truth until her death. Because of this, she couldn't calm down for 100 years. Now that she was reborn, The hand behind the scenes was like a ghost that she couldn't shake off. It reached out to her once again, and 3 of her husbands met with misfortune in succession. The first one, young General Song, was an armored man who gambled with his life, so when she heard the news of him dying on the battlefield, she only felt that it was fate at that time and didn't think much about it. The second one, young Master Lu Bohu, was clearly fine when he was engaged, but suddenly contracted an illness 3 days before the wedding. There was no cure and he passed away in less than a month. She had a suspicion in her heart, but everyone in the Duke's manor saw her as an enemy and didn't let her get close. Until the third time, she saw Cloud Leaf coming over to hold her hand with a smile after the wedding ceremony, but suddenly her expression changed abruptly and she bent over to spit out a mouthful of blood. If she still couldn't detect the problem, then she was really an idiot. Yes. Zigui immediately took the order and left quietly. Behind her, Ning Shu's face was as beautiful as fire under her bright red wedding dress, but her eyes were calm and unusually determined. In that lifetime, she saw with her own eyes the 372 people in the Duke's manor being beheaded in front of her. Her surviving brother, Ji also died in the water prison before he was 14 years old because of her dispute with Xiao Yuni a few years later. Thinking of his young body soaking quietly in the water prison, his body swollen, Ning Shu's heart was filled with sorrow. Since King Chujiang had given her another chance. Then this time, she would never allow the tragedy to repeat itself. She didn't ask for much. Even if she had to use up her last drop of blood, she would protect the health of her loved ones. Ning Shu changed out of her bright red wedding dress and was about to go and see Jia when she saw Forsythia suddenly running back in a panic, dropping the ice in her hands. The housekeeper, Mrs. Liu, scolded her softly, "You silly girl, what are you doing in such a panic? Be careful not to scare Miss." Ning Shu laughed and opened the door to go out. "Mrs. Liu, do you think I'm a porcelain doll? How can I be so easily frightened? Forsythia, if there's anything, come and tell me." Forsythia immediately went to Ning Shu's ear and said anxiously, "Miss, you should go to the old madam's quickly. Old madam is setting up a dragon's gate array inside and has invited the princess and the third madam over. The princess didn't want me to disturb you, but old madam. Anyway, you should go and take a look." Hearing this, Ning Shu's interest was suddenly piqued as she blinked. "Oh? It sounds interesting. It would be a pity if I don't go and take a look." In the banquet room of the old madam's courtyard, the maids came out with their heads lowered after serving the tea, no one daring to make a sound. The room was quiet. The old madam, Mrs. Yang, picked up a handkerchief and wiped the tears that didn't exist at the corner of her eyes. She lamented, "My poor Shu such a clever child, born like a jade. I only hate that she wasn't born in my womb. I've always treated her like the apple of my eye. How could she have such a fate?" Ari. The old madam leaned on the couch and had a bad headache. Mrs. Zhong, who was behind her, anxiously rubbed her head. Princess Hixin sat across from Mrs. Yang. Not long ago, she was comforted by Ning Shu to stop crying, but now Mrs. Yang's eyes were red again. Mrs. Yang saw this and sneered in her heart. She continued to sigh. "Originally, when the Daoist priest gave Shu a fate, I didn't believe it at all. Shu is the pearl of everyone's palm in our house. How could she jinx the 9 generations? But old madam, look, after marrying 3 times in a row, her husband didn't die a good death, but he was half dead. People have no choice but to believe it. She's almost 17, and there's less than half a year left before the Daoist priest's deadline. Old madam, what do you think should be done?" The old duke had 3 sons and 2 daughters. The 2 young ladies had already been married. Now, in the house, there were the first master Ning de Huai, the second master Ning de Yuan, and Ning de Qing. Ning de Huai and Ning de Yuan were both legitimate children. However, when Ning de Yuan was young, he accidentally met with an accident. Ning de Huai broke his leg to save him. According to the ancestral law, those with an incomplete body couldn't inherit the title. Therefore, after the old duke died, the second master Ning de Yuan was able to inherit the title. Because of this, whether it was the old madam or Ning de Yuan, they all felt guilty towards the first master. They tolerated a lot of things, but it raised the first master Yang's domineering temperament. Princess Hixin's face turned pale, and she tightly twisted the handkerchief in her hand. Sister-in-law, what do you mean? Mrs. Yang sighed and said with difficulty, I think, the only thing we can do now is to send Shu to Cishi Nunnery. I believe that under the protection of the Buddha's Guanyin Buddha, it will accumulate over time to wash away the ominous aura on Shu's body. Princess, don't worry, I'm very familiar with Hui Jing Shatai in the nunnery. I won't let Shu be wronged there. Absolutely not. Princess Hixin took a deep breath and immediately stood up. Her hand on the corner of the table was trembling. My Shu is only 16 years old. Once she enters that kind of place, her life will be ruined. Mrs. Yang pretended to be surprised and said, now, the whole capital has spread. With Shu's current reputation, not to mention any family's young master, even if it's an old man on the road, no one would dare to marry her. Is it possible that we really keep her in the house and wait for her to kill all 400 people in the house? I'm not afraid, but the old madam is old and weak. Does Princess want to be the first one to kill the old madam? Chapter 4. Yang Shi's mouth was sharp. Every word was like a knife, deliberately stabbing into Princess Hixin's heart. But Princess Hixin couldn't refute a single word. Her face turned pale, and she looked at the matriarch pleadingly. Matriarch, please understand. I don't have that intention. Yang Shi picked up the teacup and slowly took a sip. She leisurely said, since you don't have that intention, then why not? Princess, although you have a precious body and second uncle is a duke, there is no reason to use power to suppress people. Princess Hixin trembled with anger. Sister-in-law, you know that Shu has been obedient and sensible since she was a child. She has never done anything harmful. Do you want to use that baseless accusation to kill my Shu? Baseless accusation? Could it be that you want to wait for her to cause the death of her family before you admit that she is inauspicious? Yang Shi's eyes were like poisonous bees, exceptionally vicious. In this house, there is not only your second branch. There is also the matriarch, our first branch, and the third branch. Li Shi, what do you say? Li Shi was suddenly pointed out. Her heart turned 3 times in her stomach, and she faintly said, I am a stupid person. What can I think? However, he had once heard a saying, it's better to believe than not to believe. If what that Daoist said is true, then her third branch had the lowest status in the house. Today, whether it was the first branch or the second branch that was unlucky, the one to benefit was her third branch. Enough. The matriarch suddenly raised her voice. Her old and tired eyes stared at the chaos in the room. From the aggressive Yang Shi, to the onlooking Li Shi, and finally to the miserable Princess Hixin. She sighed and said, my old bones don't know when I'll pass away. I don't care if I'll be cursed to death or not. Shu is usually a good girl, it's better. Princess Hixin looked gratefully at the matriarch. Yang Shi's fingernails dug into her flesh. Her face was very ugly. The matriarch still wanted to protect that cheap girl. No, she finally found this opportunity. She couldn't give it up. She carefully hid the coldness in her eyes. Suddenly, with a bang, she knelt in front of the matriarch. Everyone was shocked. She raised her head again, tears streaming down her face. Old madam, we're already useless. Even if we die with Shu, we're willing. But you can't ignore the younger generation in the family. They are the future of our public house. If anything happens to them, our ancestors' 100 years of foundation will be destroyed in a day. The matriarch's voice suddenly stopped. Her fingers trembled. It was as if Yang Shi had blocked her throat and she couldn't say another word. She did indeed like little Shu from the bottom of her heart, but the words ancestral foundation were like 4 enormous rocks that suddenly smashed down at her, smashing her to the point she was unable to resist at all. So even if she wanted to protect little Shu, what could she do? Old lady. But the old lady hesitated for a long time, so long that Hixin's breathing stopped. However, the old lady slowly closed her eyes and turned her face away. Hixin's heart fell to the bottom of the valley. Her body swayed, and she almost fell to the ground. Madame Yang quietly curled her lips, her eyes filled with ruthlessness. If Ning Shu doesn't get rid of her, how can I, stand out? Hixin, obediently accept it. Today, I've seized the opportunity, so I won't let it go. Even if you're a princess, so what? Your daughter's appearance is stunning, so what? In the past, you stole my position as the head of the household. Today, I'll see how you and your daughter die. Come, quickly go and invite the eldest young lady here. The carriage outside the Fu has already been prepared. There's no need to pack anything. Shi Nunnery has everything, so the eldest young lady won't be wronged. Yes. Madame Yang gave the order. Her trusted subordinates immediately obeyed. I won't allow it. Hixin didn't care about anything else. She immediately rushed out with her maidservants. Zhu, immediately invite the master here. But before she could step out of the door, she was blocked at the door. It was obvious that they were prepared. Madame Yang took out a handkerchief and gently wiped the dust on her knees. She got up and walked in front of Hixin. Her smile was particularly dazzling. Princess, in the end, this is a matter of the inner residence. The masters in front are very busy, so there's no need to disturb them. Since the matriarch has already agreed, it's not up to you to not allow it. Come, the princess's body has always been weak. How can you let the princess stand for so long? Are your eyes blind? Hurry up and bring the princess back so that she can rest. Madame Yang's dagger finally appeared. With a glance, more servants guarding the door rushed in and surrounded them. They shamelessly came forward to forcibly invite the princess away. Princess Hixin held onto the door frame. She was so angry that her whole body trembled. The matriarch couldn't bear it and turned her head to wipe her tears. But behind her, Madame Yang still raised her voice. That's right, the 500 sets of dowry. I'm afraid that Shu'er won't need it anymore. It's better to take it out and give it to the other girls in the Fu who are about to get married. It's better for them to marry into a good family and help our Fu consolidate the family business. Hixin's vision turned black and she was about to fall. Princess Hixin. Fortunately, a hand suddenly appeared and supported her. I'll see, who dares to touch my mother? Chapter 5. The owner of that hand handed her mother over to Forsythia and then leisurely opened her mouth against the light. My mother is a first-rank noble. The previous emperor personally conferred the title of Junju. If anything happens to her, the death penalty will be hard to escape. Could it be that you have two heads? Accompanying that voice was a leisurely figure that slowly walked into the room and into Madame Yang's line of sight. Madame Yang saw the hair ornament gently swaying with her steps. Her waist was very straight and the smile in her eyes was like the first pomegranate in early summer, like fire. Seeing that Ning Shu had delivered herself to her door, Madame Yang's lips curled into a mocking smile. Ah, eldest miss, I was just about to send someone to invite you. It just so happened that you came by yourself, saving me the trouble. Hixin wanted to say something, but Ning Shu personally placed a soft cushion on the chair and helped Hixin sit down. She returned a comforting look and then calmly turned her head to look at Madame Yang. It really is a coincidence. I was just thinking about eldest aunt, but I didn't think that you would also think about me. Eldest aunt loves me the most and is closer to me than mother and daughter. Just now, I heard that eldest aunt wanted to temporarily send Shu'er to the nunnery. Shu'er can agree. Hixin was shocked. Shu'er, what nonsense are you saying? Hearing this, Madame Yang's heart was filled with great joy. This girl really accepted her fate. She tightly clenched her fists and maintained a dignified appearance. Hixin, since Shu'er is so sensible and filial to the whole Fu, how can you stop her? Someone come, quickly send eldest miss out of the Fu. Hold on. Ning Shu interrupted her. Under her anxious gaze, she said slowly, but I have a condition. What condition? As long as you are willing to go, eldest aunt will satisfy you. Madame Yang's smile was abnormally warm. Great. Ning Shu suddenly intimately grabbed Madame Yang's sleeve. Just now, I was outside the door and heard that eldest aunt was willing to accompany Shu'er to death. Shu'er was very moved. Then, I ask eldest aunt to accompany me to the nunnery so that we can continue to be close. What? The smile on Madame Yang's face suddenly froze and she pulled back her sleeve as if she had seen a ghost. Ning Shu blinked. Auntie, you promised me just now. Why are you going back on your word now? Could it be that your righteous words just now were to coax Shu'er and grandmother? This time, it was Madame Yang's turn to be choked. She looked at the matriarch in panic. She did want to punish Ning Shu, so that she would never be able to step into the House of Duke for the rest of her life. However, that did not mean that she was willing to put herself in danger. But if she refused, then what she said in front of the old lady just now would be a slap to her own face. When did this girl become so sharp-tongued? Just as Yang Shi was panicking, a slender and graceful figure slowly walked in. Eldest sister, it's not like you don't know, my mother's health hasn't been very good in recent years. Even if she wants to accompany you, she doesn't have the strength. I believe that big sister has always been benevolent and respectful, and you would definitely be unwilling to let your elders suffer, right? The person who came was dressed in pink and green. She was as delicate as a willow, and her voice was gentle and considerate. Who else could it be but second Miss Ning Wan? When she met Ning Wan's eyes, Madame Yang immediately let out a sigh of relief. Her daughter's wits were still better. With one sentence, she blocked Ning Shu's way. If Ning Shu still insisted on her accompanying her, then she was not looking at the big picture and was disrespectful to her elders. Ning Shu nodded, as if she felt that it was quite reasonable. That's true. Eldest aunt is old and can't bear the hardships in the nunnery. If something happens to her in the bitter cold mountain temple, my heart will ache. She turned her head and looked at Ning Wan. Wan will also feel heartache, right? Ning Wan softly said, as a daughter, it's natural. Ning Shu clapped her hands and praised, Wan is really considerate and filial. Big sister is overpraising, Wan doesn't dare to accept. Ning Wan hurriedly and shyly bowed. Then what should I do? Ning Shu frowned and thought for a long time, as if she was extremely distressed. On the side, Ning Wan's lips quietly curled up. Big sister, don't blame me today, you can only blame yourself, who asked His Highness the Sixth Prince to only have his eyes on you. Then I can only destroy you. Just as Ning Wan was feeling proud, Ning Shu's eyes suddenly turned and she affectionately held her hand. Since eldest aunt can't go, second sister can go instead. Thinking about it, second sister is so filial, you must be happy. Moreover, you and I have been harmonious since we were young and are as close as one person. In the future, we will definitely be able to help each other. Grandmother, let's do it this way. Servants, quickly prepare the carriage. My sister and I will set off now. As she spoke, she pulled Ning Wan and hurriedly walked out, as if she couldn't wait to live in the nunnery immediately. What? In an instant, Ning Wan was stunned, the old madam was shocked, Madame Yang was dumbfounded, and everyone was stunned. Chapter 6. Seeing Ning Shu pulling Ning Wan and rushing out, Yang Shi widened her eyes and hurried over to stop Ning Wan. However, Ning Shu grabbed Ning Wan's wrist tightly and she could not break free. How can this be? If Ning Wan was also dragged to the nunnery, then what was the use of her plan? It would only harm others and herself. Ning Wan was on the verge of tears. She wanted to help her mother get rid of the thorn in her side, not die with Ning Wan. She was only 16, she did not want to go. However, did she dare to say no? With so many people present, if she said no, she would be labeled as unfilial. The matriarch would be the first to look down on her. How could she raise her head in the fu in the future? Immediately, the banquet room became chaotic again. However, this time, it was not He Xin who stopped her, but Yang Shi, Good Shu, quickly let go of Wan. She can't go. Ning Shu was puzzled. Why? Second sister is being filial for first aunt. The Buddhas and Bodhisattvas will be moved by this and will bless second sister to live a long life. Yang Shi's face was as colorful as ink. She screamed in her heart, if I'm locked up in the nunnery forever, how can I live a long life? That's simply torture. However, her mouth seemed to be gagged and she could not say a word. It seems that first aunt has agreed. That's great. Forsythia, go and invite everyone in the fu. It's best if you invite all the families nearby to send me and second sister off. Let them know that first aunt has taught well and second sister is a filial girl. She is willing to go to the nunnery to accompany me to pray for the fu. She can be a role model for everyone. Ning Shu was full of joy and did not seem to be faking it. Yang Ji received the order and immediately called out loudly with a few maids. Seeing that more and more people were gathering in the Fu, Yangsha felt dizzy. Those who lived on this street were either high-ranking officials or nobles. If everyone knew, then she, Wn would have to go even if she did not want to. In a moment of desperation, she immediately grabbed Ning Shu and said anxiously, "Because you don't have to go in a hurry." Every word he said was like a punch to his heart. But in this situation, if he didn't relent, he didn't know how much trouble Ning Shu would cause this time. Wanna was her treasure. She would not allow her daughter to be Ning Wan's scapegoat. Ning Shu was put in a difficult position. She frowned and said, "But if I stay in the Fu, what if I bring bad luck to grandmother and the elders?" Madame Yang's smile was extremely stiff. "No, you won't. You're not 17 yet. There are still 6 months left before the deadline that Taoist Li mentioned." Ning Shu still didn't let go. She lowered her head and muttered softly, "Then what if in these 6 months, the younger siblings in the Fu fall ill?" Shu was still young and could not bear the crime of destroying the foundation of her ancestors. "Auntie, please let us go." Seeing that she still wanted to leave, Madame Yang's vision turned black. Her teeth almost broke from clenching, but she still had to bite the bullet and swallow the blood into her stomach. "If something happens in the Fu, it won't be your fault, so it's like this." Ning Shu gave a long sigh and finally let go of Ning Wan's wrist. She obediently bowed to the matriarch. "Grandmother, that good Rong Shu will continue to be filial to you in these next few months." The matriarch happily held her hand and patted it again and again. She had always liked this girl. If Madame Yang hadn't used the foundation of her ancestors to pressure her, how could she watch her eldest granddaughter jump into the fire pit? She quickly pulled Ning Wn back to her side. Madame Yang rubbed her precious daughter's swollen wrist. She was so angry that her whole body trembled. Her voice was shaking as she squeezed out each word through gritted teeth. "Eldest miss, in these next few months, feel free to rest, well, in the Fu. However, when your 17th birthday arrives, if you're still not married off, at that time, don't blame Auntie, go to the ancestral hall." Chapter 7. Who said no one wants to marry my sister? A round and chubby little dumpling wearing a milky yellow jacket rushed in like a cannonball, standing in front of Ning Shu to protect her. It was Ning Shu's little brother, Ji who was just 5 years old. Little Ji turned his head and grabbed Ning Shu's hand. He said in a childish voice, "Sister, wait for me for a few more years. When Ji grows up, I will marry you. I won't let anyone bully you." With Ning Ji's interruption, the tense atmosphere in the banquet room immediately disappeared. The matriarch was simply overjoyed. On the side, Xin, who was completely relieved, quickly wiped her tears with a handkerchief. Ning Shu bent down and gently scratched the tip of Ning Ji's little nose. Her eyes curved. "Okay, sister will wait for you to grow up." On the side, Lisha couldn't watch the show and withdrew with a lack of interest. Yangsha's lungs were about to explode. She narrowed her eyes and stared at Ning Shu. She silently gritted her teeth. "Just you wait." Feeling her gaze, Ning Shu turned her head and gave her a sweet smile. "Okay, I'll wait right now." "Mother." In the first branch's fragrant courtyard, Ning Shu smashed the flower pot in her hand on the ground. Then, she stepped on the blooming begonia flowers, as if she was stepping on Ning Shu's face. After crushing the petals little by little, she cried and threw herself into Yangsha's arms. "How can we let that lowly servant go like this? What kind of sorcery does that lowly servant have? Why is she more beautiful than me? Her identity is more honorable than mine. Even if she has that kind of fate, why would the matriarch protect her? Also, those 500 sets of dowry, why should it only be given to her? Just because her father is a duke and her mother is a junju? Those should have been mine. Mother, I won't accept it. I won't accept it." Even if half of those 500 sets of dowry were given to her, she could still raise her head among the young ladies in the capital and make His Highness the 6th Prince look up to her. However, her efforts were all for naught. How could she not be angry? "My good WNR, don't cry, don't cry," Yangsha coaxed her baby with heartache. "She's lucky that we didn't manage to deal with her today. She didn't have much time left, at most 9 months. Once the time limit is up, she won't have any more excuses. Mother will make sure that she dies willingly. Madame Yang's eyes were filled with venom. Moreover, it's not certain if she'll be able to survive the next 6 months. Ningguan's eyes were filled with tears. What should we do? Yang Shi's gaze passed through the window lattice and looked at the red lanterns that had been hung up in the courtyard, thinking that there would be a happy occasion today. A sinister glint flashed through her eyes. I heard that the young master of the Yun residence is still in his sickbed. The entire residence is in a mess. Madame Yun is angry and worried, blaming everything on Ning Shu. This is such a good opportunity, let's just. Ning Wan tilted her head and listened carefully. Her face was colored with the same sinister expression. If Ning Wan's father hadn't harmed her father, the title of duke would have fallen on her father's head, and she would have been the high and mighty miss of the Di family. Ning Shu, that bitch, wasn't even fit to carry her shoes. Therefore, since she was young, whatever Ning Shu fancied, she would snatch it away. Whatever clothes Ning Shu had, she wanted better ones. Since His Highness the 6th Prince fancied Ning Shu, then she would think of a way to snatch it away. In short, in this lifetime, she would definitely step on Ning Shu's head. The spring night was slightly chilly. The cuckoo that had returned from winter in the south was hiding in the peach blossom trees, chirping. Forsythia was preparing to serve Ning Shu to sleep when Zigui returned to report the news. Reporting to Miss, the Yun residents invited all the famous doctors in the city to treat him. They all said that young Master Yun's illness was very strange. There were no abnormalities on the surface of his body, but he kept vomiting blood. After careful examination, it was found that the heart, liver, spleen, lungs, and kidneys were all damaged. Chapter 8. Zigui recounted honestly, the physicians tried their best today to preserve young Master Yun's life for now, but it's hard to say if young Master Yun can recover after this. Imperial Censor Yun was so anxious that he immediately handed over a token to summon the Imperial physician. Ning Shu frowned and asked, "Did you find out if he was poisoned?" Zigui shook his head. The physicians said that they did not find any signs of poisoning, but that it seemed to be caused by someone hitting him hard. However, it contradicted what was said. They did not find any bruises on young Master Yun's body. Imperial Censor Yun repeatedly asked all the servants around young Master Yun if he had fought with anyone recently, but all of them shook their heads and denied it. Were there any other abnormalities? Zigui lowered his head and recalled carefully before shaking his head. Under the yellowish candlelight, Ning Shu dabbed water as ink and slowly wrote the complicated thoughts in her mind on the table. The night air was cool, gently drying the water stains on the table. Ning Shu was in no hurry as she continued writing after dabbing the water. Beside her, Zigui wanted to say something but hesitated. He could not help but speak up. "Miss, the whole city is now saying that you cursed young Master Yun." The storyteller at Parting Cloud Inn made this into a story and spread it widely. This subordinate will teach those who started the rumor a lesson tomorrow. I will not let them tarnish your reputation again. Forsythia was furious when she heard that. "I'll go with you. Wait for me to tear apart those fabricated mouths." Young Master Yun's illness was not poisoned by her mistress, nor was she the one who injured him. It was foolish to pin a crime on someone based on a few rumors. Ning Shu pondered and chuckled, "With the strength of the two of you, you won't be able to stop 10,000 idle mouths. Instead, you'll be used as an excuse to attack us again, which will fulfill some people's wishes. Since that's the case, there's no need to be calculative with them. The innocent will know that they are innocent. Moreover, I have thick skin. Will this bit of spittle hurt a piece of flesh on my body? There's no need to bother. Zigui, continue to guard the residents of Yun. Report to me immediately if there's any new news." Zigui accepted the order and left. Forsythia pouted angrily while making the bed for Ning Shu. She didn't disturb Ning Shu's thoughts. She looked at the handwritten handwriting and studied it carefully. It looked like poison, but it wasn't poison. It looked like injury, but it wasn't injury. There wasn't a trace of bruise on the surface, but all of his internal organs were damaged. All of his internal organs were injured, but he didn't notice it at all. This was simply the biggest contradiction. Cloudleaf was obsessed with poetry and essays. Basically, he did not go out of the residence of Yoon. The people he befriended were all scholars in the literary world. Furthermore, he was modest and did not make enemies. In the past month, he had been busy preparing for the wedding. He was either busy in the mansion or going in and out of the wedding shops in Shi City with his manservant. He didn't even have time to attend his friends' gatherings. If he was injured, where did this injury come from? But if he was poisoned, then the poison was so potent that no one could detect it. It must be a strange poison. The person who poisoned him had put in a lot of effort. Was the poison targeting the cloud leaf or her? At this moment, the night wind suddenly blew. The peach blossom tree in the middle of the courtyard outside the window made a rustling sound. The newly bloomed peach blossom petals left the receptacle and were swept into the small window by the wind. Ning Shu subconsciously reached out and grabbed a petal. There were more petals falling on the wet table. Ning Shu suddenly stood up. The moonlight that was like water reflected into her pair of jade eyes, making her eyes look clear and beautiful. Perhaps, we need to take some time to visit my second husband who died early. Forsythia opened her mouth wide. Ah! Chapter 9. Under the moonlight, two figures sneaked into the ancestral grave of the Qi family. She saw hundreds of gloomy tombstones silently looking at the two strangers who had intruded without saying a word. It was so quiet that it seemed that even the nearby frogs and insects were buried with them. The warm spring breeze in the distance also turned cold here. There was a gloomy air everywhere that made one's hair stand on end. Forsythia's face was pale. She shrunk her neck and followed Ning Shu closely. She did not dare to look around, afraid that the ancestors of the Qi family would suddenly jump out of the tombstones and choke her. Ning Shu walked leisurely as if she was strolling in a garden. She nimbly passed through the rows of gloomy tombstones and carefully looked for traces of the elegant second husband. What are you afraid of? The people lying here have long rotted into a pile of bones. Even if there are any left, there are only ghosts floating here. Ghosts are not as scary as people. Really? Forsythia swallowed hard and desperately tried to gather her courage. How can it be fake? Ning Shu mischievously said, some ghosts have terrible faces, broken hands, missing heads, and bleeding stomachs, but their hearts are very simple. They don't often eat people. Even if they do, they will eat the one in the crowd who is the most afraid and screams the loudest. Ah. Forsythia was so scared that she was about to scream, but she quickly stopped herself and stared at her young miss with resentment. After playing around, the two quickly quieted down to do business. After about half an hour, Ning Shu stopped in front of a tombstone. The tombstone of the 26th generation of the Qi family, the second son of the first wife, Huai Jin. This was it. Ning Shu's eyes lit up. Bring the tools and dig. Ah, are we really going to dig? How can it be fake? It's not easy to come to see second husband, so we have to meet him face to face. It's not rude. Moreover, some things could not be seen without personally examining it. Forsythia made up her mind. She covered her mouth and nose with her handkerchief and started digging the grave with Ning Shu. Because it was a new grave, the soil was not tight. In less than an hour, they found the coffin. As soon as she opened it, the smell was extremely pungent. Even through the thick handkerchief, she almost fainted from the smell. However, she saw that Ning Shu didn't care and bent down to check the body. Second husband, I'm sorry to offend you. The corpse was 7 feet and 5 inches tall. Its limbs were long and slender, and its bones were intact. However, the corpse had long decayed and was emitting a thick stench. The brocade robe wrapped around the corpse was also slightly tattered, and it tore with a single tug. His skin was purplish black and clung tightly to his bones. His hair had all fallen off, and his once handsome and elegant face was no longer as charming as before. Ning Shu sighed in her heart. She ordered Forsythia to bring the silver needles over. She pricked his mouth and nose, and the needles worked as usual. He then examined his neck and internal organs, but the silver needles still did not turn black. There were no wounds on the corpse either. Forsythia, help me flip him over. Both of them used their strength to flip him over, and the results were the same. Dagger. Ning Shu took it and cut open his stomach. She found that his heart, liver, spleen, lungs, and kidneys were all shattered. Forsythia gasped, "It's the same as young Master Yun." Ning Shu frowned and checked inch by inch from his skull down. With the help of the hazy moonlight, she could vaguely see that there seemed to be a darker patch on the side of his neck, but she couldn't make out its shape. Ning Shu was about to take a closer look when she suddenly heard a commotion coming from afar. Forsythia, quickly close the coffin and hide. However, the sound was getting closer and closer. Ning Shu immediately said, "It's too late. Take away a few of the burial items. We'll hide." Both of them immediately put away all their tools and tidied up Qi Huaijin's corpse. They hid behind a thick locust tree and kept quiet. Creak, creak, creak. The even sound of the wheels was especially clear in the night. Through the thick branches, Ning Shu saw a carriage parked not far away. The interior of the carriage was luxuriously decorated. The coachman was a young man who was not even 20 years old. He was tall and handsome. He jumped off the carriage nimbly, then turned around respectfully. He bowed and extended his arm towards the carriage. "Sir, please slow down." A hand reached out from inside the carriage, lifting the curtain. Chapter 10. It was a pair of beautiful hands. They were not soft and beautiful like a woman's, but a man's. They were slender and white, and seemed to be whiter than the moonlight. Looking at those hands, one would know what the word precious meant. The owner of the hands held the young man's arm and slowly walked down the carriage. Only then did she see the man's body clearly. It was almost April, but he was still wearing a cloak as if he was afraid of the cold. A fox fur coat was wrapped around his neck, revealing only his beautiful chin. Because of an old illness, his lips were very light pink. Above that was a high nose bridge, but his eyes were covered with a black silk ribbon. The black silk ribbon, black cloak, and even the fox fur coat around his neck were black, which made his skin look even paler. He was very tall, even taller than the young man next to him. Forsythia had never seen such a good-looking person. She was stunned. Ning Shu could not help but be stunned for a moment. The next moment, she was surprised. Could it be him? The young man helped the man to Qi Huaijin's tomb. The young man felt something was wrong and immediately ran forward. "Master, the tomb of the third son of Qi Huaijin was robbed. The thieves took away all the valuables, and the cups were scattered all over the ground. The guards of the Qi family were too negligent." The man opened his mouth. "How is the third son of Qi Huaijin?" His voice was clear and deep. The body was not damaged, but this smell. "Master, why don't you wait for me to clean it up first?" The smell was so bad that the young man could not help but cover his nose and mouth. The man was very calm and his expression did not change. "It's okay. Bring me some wine, I'll give a toast to the third son." The young man did not dare to delay and immediately went to the carriage to get a set of white jade wine set. He poured the wine into 2 white jade cups and offered it to the man. The man took 1 cup first. "Brother Huaijin, you and I are childhood friends. We have been writing to each other for many years and we are very close friends. Then I suddenly heard that Brother Huaijin died of an illness. I didn't have time to send you off, so I came back to the capital to apologize to you." The man raised his neck and drank the wine in 1 gulp. A thin layer of moonlight gently covered the side of his face, drawing a soft ivory white line down along the bridge of his tall nose, and the unfinished wine bead on the tip of his lips shimmered faintly. Ning Shu's eyes couldn't help but stick to the drop of wine on the tip of his lips. She couldn't help but sigh. He was truly a stunner. Unfortunately, his eyes were damaged, and his white jade was slightly blemished. But in the next moment, that person suddenly changed his hand gesture and threw the white jade cup in Ning Shu's direction. The force was so great that the tree branches in front of him were all broken. Ning Shu knew something was wrong and immediately dodged to the side, but she couldn't avoid it. She was forced to twist her body and jump down from the tree with Forsythia. The white jade cup smashed into the tree trunk and shattered into pieces. One of the pieces brushed past her neck and cut off a strand of hair on the side of her neck, landing on her shoulder. She had no doubt that if he wanted to, What was cut off just now would not be her hair, but her neck. "Who are you?" that person asked in an extremely indifferent voice. Ning Shu touched her cold neck and turned her head with a sweet smile. She was very obedient. This little girl has nothing to do and happened to pass by to enjoy the scenery. "The moonlight tonight is really good. It's a pleasure to meet you, young master." That person sneered and mercilessly exposed her nonsense. "It is good. In the middle of the night, the cold moon is cold, the grass is silent, and the lone grave is under the tree. This scenery is too beautiful to be imagined. It's so beautiful that you want to dig up the grave in the middle of the night." Chapter 11. After being mocked, Ning Shu did not blush at all. "Sigh. Young master, you may not know this, but the person lying in this tomb is my daughter's husband. I haven't seen him for a long time, and it's lonely in the middle of the night. I miss him very much. I thought that my husband would miss me too, so I specially invited him out to meet me." A cool breeze blew, lifting his long black hair. Under the moonlight, he looked like an immortal. He reached out to take another wine cup and slowly poured the wine in front of Qi Huijin's grave. "How come I heard that your husband is lying on a sickbed in the residence of Yun?" Ning Shu was speechless after being exposed. After a while, she smiled and said, "Cloudleaf is my new husband, but my marriage with the third young master of the Qi family was also decided by the emperor. Now that I have a new husband, I shouldn't forget my old one. Just now, I was being fair, don't you think so?" Ning Shu was about to continue talking nonsense but was interrupted by him. There was a hint of impatience between his eyebrows as if he did not want to continue talking with her. Ning Shu, the eldest daughter of the official wife of the House of High Duke, 16 years old, under the tutelage of Master Zhuge Hui, clever and decisive. When she was 10 years old, Taoist Yun Yu said that her life was unlucky. When she was 15 years old, she married 3 people. 2 of them died suddenly, and the last one was unknown. You suspected that someone was secretly targeting you, so you came here in the middle of the night to dig up the corpse to confirm your suspicion. Because you didn't want to expose yourself in front of me, you took away the burial objects in an emergency and led the suspicion to the tomb robbers. But there are hundreds of tombs here, and the ancestors of the Qi family are all buried here. There are many who were buried with more people than the third young master of the Qi family. If it was a tomb robber, he would start from the most luxurious burial place first, and then the others. The more, the better. Even if you did it on the spur of the moment and were unprepared, the safest way would be to find the closest tomb and leave before the guards find out. But the place where the third young master of the Qi family was buried. The man did not bother to continue, and a deep sneer appeared on his lips. "You think you are smart." He was blind, but at this moment, Ning Shu felt embarrassed as if she was naked in front of him. It was as if her every secret and thought had been seen through by him. No, it shouldn't be just her. He might even be in control of the entire capital. Ning Shu's shock lasted only for a moment. She quickly calmed down and smiled. "Young master, you're extremely intelligent. My daughter admires you greatly. It's just that I'm very curious. Why didn't you come to pay your respects to third young master Qi during the day? Instead, you chose to visit in the dead of night when there's no one around. Could it be that you also have some unspeakable secret like me? Heir of Xiaohou." She spat out the last 4 words word by word from her bright red lips. In her previous life, Ning Shu had never seen his real face, but today, she knew that there was no one else but Xiaohou Qing in front of her. Because in this huge capital, there were so many noble people, but there was no one whose temperament could make her so amazed. It was extremely gorgeous, but also extremely distant, like a swimming dragon breaking through the Milky Way, sprinkling golden waves all over the sky. It was also like the first snow lying on a green branch, a piece of snow slowly falling down. You immediately reached out to catch it, but when you opened your palm, you couldn't see anything. You knew that you couldn't catch anything, but you couldn't help but desperately chase after it. Even the Empress praised him when she saw him for the first time. When you see Xiaohou Qing, the world pales in comparison. She remembered that in her previous life, he died at the age of 24. Before he died, he stayed in Yunju in the southwest and did not set foot in the capital. Could it be that because of her rebirth, Many things had changed subtly in the unseen world. The corners of Xiahou Qing's calm lips finally curled up. The first thing that could be called a smile tonight was shockingly beautiful. But it was cold. So, you have seen through my identity. I can only ask you to die. Chapter 12. Ning Xu did not expect that the first time she met the legendary Crown Prince Xiahou, she would be grabbed by the neck. Moreover, her neck was grabbed by the handkerchief. Obviously, he thought she was dirty. The former could be tolerated, but the latter could not be tolerated. You let go of my miss. Forsythia rushed over and was knocked unconscious by the young man's hand. Ning Xu felt a spark in her chest. She was furious. She furrowed her brows and took a deep breath. Then, she smiled and said, "Your Highness, there is no one in the entire Great Yu who doesn't know about your peerless beauty. If my daughter couldn't guess your identity, it would be disrespectful to you." She could not tolerate it. She had to tolerate it. Nonsense. In the eyes of the person opposite her, she was not even comparable to a bug. He could crush her with a slight frown. Dignity was precious, but her life was even more precious. But the hand on her neck tightened, almost making her unable to breathe. The smile on his lips was chilling. "Just because I came here in the middle of the night, you concluded that I have a secret matter. It hurts." Her life was in his hands. Ning Xu could not help but feel a little scared. She did not doubt that Xiahou Qing would really kill her. She kept calm and shook her head. "When you first arrived here and noticed the abnormality, I heard the young man beside you say, 'Third young master did not suffer any damage. It's just the smell. Why don't you wait for me to deal with it?' It was not wait for me to call the Qi family to deal with it." Although there were only a few words difference, the meaning was completely different. It means that you don't want the Qi family to know what you want to do. So what if it is not a secret matter? However, I don't dare to ask what your secret matter is. And I also don't want others to know that I came to dig the grave tonight. You and I have something on each other. If you are worried that I will leak the secret and want to kill me, you don't have to. Moreover, our target tonight is third young master Qi. My goal is clear to the Crown Prince. I only want to prove my innocence and ensure my own safety. I will not harm the Crown Prince and may even lend you a helping hand. What does the Crown Prince think?" Xiahou Qing felt that the neck under his hand was surprisingly slender. The girl's warm body temperature passed through the handkerchief to his cold palm. She was like a bird that had just come out of its nest. As long as he gently squeezed it, it would break. The owner of the neck had a soft voice. It sounded very obedient, but the steady voice was like a bamboo in the wind. It was full of tenacity. "You are not too stupid," Xiahou Qing said. The cold hand suddenly, the snow-white handkerchief fell to the ground. Xiahou Qing ignored her and said, "Hui Mo, get to work." The young man called Hui Mo immediately accepted the order. He took out a piece of cloth wrapped in vinegar and garlic juice and tied it in front of his mouth and nose. Then, he ran to Qi Huijin's coffin and took out a bunch of tools and started to work. The tools were many times more complete than Ning Xu's. Ning Xu rubbed her neck, which had been ravaged again and again tonight, and laughed, "Ha! It turned out that he was also here to dig graves. What a coincidence. Didn't that prove that her guess was right?" Third young Master Qi's death was indeed suspicious. Hui Mo was very fast. Apparently, he was experienced in this field. In less than half an hour, he had finished the inspection. He nailed the coffin and even covered the soil. Then he ran back to Xiahou Qing and whispered a few words to him respectfully. His expression was very serious. With his back to the moonlight, Xiahou Qing seemed to be touched, but his face was immersed in the darkness. He couldn't see anything clearly. "Let's go." Hui Mo took the order, bowed again and helped Xiahou Qing back to the carriage, ready to leave. Obviously, he was not going to care about Ning Xu and the others. However, Forsythia was still unconscious because of the young man named Hui Mo Ha. Did he want her to carry a living person back to the mansion? Ning Xu narrowed her eyes and stood in front of the carriage. She sighed, "It seems that you are not going to be responsible for me." Chapter 13. Hui Mo smacked his lips. Why did her words sound so ambiguous? It sounded like his Shizzy was a heartless man who ran away after eating. This Lady Ning was too fierce. Through the thick curtain, Xiahou Qing's voice was particularly cold. Get out of the way. Ning Shu shook her head. It's okay if Shizzy doesn't help me. Later, if I'm careless and get caught by the Qi family, then I can only accept it. Suddenly, she slipped out a jade pendant from her sleeve. Her fingers hooked the red string in the air and she said innocently, I just don't know what they will think when they see this jade pendant in my hand. Hui Mo looked at it with the help of the moonlight. It was very familiar. When he looked back, he found that one of the jade pendants on Shiz's waist was missing. When did she steal it? That's right. It must be when Shizzy grabbed her neck just now. But at that time, she was so scared that she kept quiet. Who would have thought that she dared to steal Shiz's thing at the critical moment of life and death? More importantly, she was not discovered. This woman was more complicated than he thought. Ning Shu held the jade pendant. Under the moonlight, her lips were full of slyness. In the 6 reincarnations, she was either an animal or a beggar. What didn't she do to survive? Stealing small things was a necessary skill. She walked closer to the carriage and continued, when they see this man's jade pendant in my hand, they will be suspicious and ask who it is. I can only say that it's my lover's. It was necessary for them to ask what my lover and I were doing here. I can only say that we are meeting here on such a good day. Then, they will ask who my lover is. Then I can only say that it's Shizzy. In any case, my reputation has long been tarnished. I don't care what other people say about me, but your Highness' reputation is very important. Her expression was very magnanimous. The last sentence seemed to be for his sake. Hui Mo was shocked by Ning Shu's shamelessness. What nonsense are you talking about? My family's young master is of noble character and is a gentleman. How could he do such a thing? Moreover, this is the Qi family's ancestral tomb. Ning Shu shrugged. Some things are only exciting when done in a graveyard. Young Master Shiz's elegance and bearing are extraordinary. It's reasonable for him to have some unknown hobbies, isn't it? Hui Mo almost vomited blood. Do you think others will believe you? Ning Shu stepped forward and lifted the curtain embroidered with silver peonies. She smiled leisurely at the handsome man leaning against the brocade cushion. Who knows? After all, there's a saying in the marketplace, what's it called, dumplings are better than delicious food, and sister-in-law is better than fun. He had just addressed Qi Huaijin as Brother Huaijin, so wasn't she half a sister-in-law? That was right. Hui Mo's handsome face instantly turned purple and red. He was ashamed and angry at the same time. Stay away from my young master. In the spacious carriage, a golden copper stove was quietly burning with flames, warming up the interior of the carriage. A pot of wine was being heated above the fire. Xiahou Qing's left hand was placed on his knee, gently twirling with an ivory-like toy. His right hand held the pot and poured himself a cup of wine. After he finished drinking, his pale lips regained some color. He raised his head and smiled coldly at her. Are you sure that I won't kill you? Ning Shu was not afraid at all. Instead, she got on the carriage and sat opposite him. I just thought, young Master Shizzy didn't kill me just now. It's not because you feel sorry for me. If I die, it's not good for your Highness. It's like fishing. Even if you prepare a good fishing rod, if you lose the bait, how can the fat fish in the lake bite the hook? Chapter 14. When a person was about to die, how could he sympathize with another person? In that life, Xiahou Qing's death was strange. It was like a big secret that no one knew about. But now, he quietly appeared in the capital and appeared in front of Qi Huaijin's grave. There was only one explanation: Qi Huaijin's death was extremely important to him. And she, who was firmly related to Qi Huaijin's death, was an even more important chess piece on the chessboard. How could a chess piece die before it was used up? The carriage was terrifyingly quiet. He could only hear the bubbling sound of the wine boiling in the wine pot. Xiahou Qing's face was as calm as the sea, without a trace of emotion. But this kind of calmness made Ning Shu a little nervous. She didn't know anything about Xiahou Qing. If he was temperamental, It was possible that he would directly chop her up without caring about anything. She secretly thought. In the end, she was too careless. After a long while, Xiahou Qing's light pink lips let out a low laugh. I've seen a lot of shameless people, but it's the first time I've seen someone like you. Being ridiculed in front of such a beautiful man, even if Ning Shu's face was as thick as a city wall, there was a layer of thin blush. Sorry. How could a person not be shameless when they were in Jianghu? Hui Mo, bring her. Xiahou Qing lightly said this sentence and didn't say another word. Hui Mo immediately followed the order and carried the unconscious Forsythia into the carriage and put her beside Ning Shu. Then he glared at Ning Shu and lifted the curtain to drive away. What Shi Yang said was right. Beautiful women were tigers, very bad. Just now when he saw Shizzy Yi wanted to strangle her to death, his heart was somewhat unbearable. Humph. The carriage traveled steadily and quickly on the road. Soon, they entered the capital. Forsythia woke up halfway. When they reached Zhuqiu Street, Hui Mo stopped the carriage and said unhappily, Lady Ning, please. When the two got out of the car, Ning Shu suddenly thought of something. She embarrassedly rubbed the tip of her nose and handed the jade pendant she stole to Xiahou Qing. Shizzy Yi, I was rude just now. I'll return your jade pendant to you. Xiahou Qing didn't even raise his chin as he faintly threw out 4 words. It's dirty, throw it away. Without waiting for Ning Shu to say another word, he lowered the curtain and the carriage quickly drove away. She looked at the jade pendant in her hand that was carved with fish swimming in the abyss. It was made of the best mutton fat white jade and was as white as that person's hand. She was afraid that she would not be able to find a second piece of such good quality in the palace. Ning Shu smiled. It would be a pity to throw away such a good jade pendant. He had strangled her, and she had taken his jade pendant. An eye for an eye, an eye for an eye. It was not a loss. As for the secret hidden on Qi Huaijin's body, Ning Shu raised her head and looked at the round moon that was embedded in the night sky. Her eyes were as bright as a mirror. The dagger had finally appeared. If Xiahou Qing did not tell her, she would find out on her own. This night was destined to be an extraordinary night. Duke Dinggua's mansion, carrying fragrant courtyard. Ning Wan held the maidservant's hand and whispered, Remember what I told you. You must do this secretly and not let anyone find out. You can't let anyone find out that it was us. Miss, don't worry. This servant will not let you down. The maidservant wholeheartedly agreed. She hid the things and changed into a set of grey clothes. She put on a cloak and quietly walked out of the Duke Dinggua's mansion's small door. Behind her, Ning Wan tightly clenched her teeth and pinched her palms. Her eyes were full of ruthlessness. Ning Shu, oh Ning Shu, you blocked my way. I can only take your life. Just you wait. I want to see how you can't escape this time. Chapter 15. For the next few days, Ning Wan was so nervous that she could not sit still in her room. She looked forward to hearing about Ning Shu's miserable state after the incident. She waited for 3 days straight. At dawn, Ning Wan had a sleepless night. Suddenly, she heard servant Qin Bai rushing in from outside. Why are you in such a hurry? Is it done? Ning Wan grabbed Qin Bai's wrist, her voice filled with secret anticipation. Qin Bai's face was red and white. She immediately whispered into Ning Wan's ear. After listening, Ning Wan frowned and asked in surprise, how did this happen? She did not want to harm Ning Shu's life. She only wanted her to die in the nunnery deep in the mountains and never return. Who knew that such an accident would happen? She was extremely shocked. Ning Wan's nails dug deep into Qin Bai's wrist as she asked anxiously, What I told you to do 3 days ago, will there be any mistakes? This was already a huge matter. If she was implicated, she would not be able to escape from this disaster. Qin Bai quickly replied, Don't worry, miss. I followed your instructions and did it secretly. I guarantee that no one will find out about us. Ning Wan was relieved. She raised her chin and revealed an agitated and ruthless expression. It seems that this is an order from God to take her life. Don't blame me. My good sister, when you die, I will send you off properly. At the same time, Ning Shu was still in her dream. Zigui came in through the window with the morning dew and immediately woke Ningxu up. Miss, something bad has happened. Please leave with me. Forsythia, who was on night watch, was startled awake. She immediately asked, what happened? Zigui spoke quickly. Last night, after young Master Yun vomited blood again, he suddenly fainted and was on the verge of death. Imperial Censor Yun immediately called for the imperial physician. The imperial physician rushed to save him but was almost unable to save him. When the imperial physician was treating young Master Yun, he suddenly discovered a 4-petal-shaped red spot on the side of young Master Yun's neck. Imperial Censor Yun and Madame Yun immediately gave the order to search the entire residence. 2 hours later, a servant of the Yun residence found a pouch under the begonia tree in young Master Yun's courtyard. Inside the pouch was a blood-colored talisman and a jade hairpin. Ningxu was already awake. She quickly put on her clothes with the help of Forsythia. The sun was already out of the clouds. The first ray of light shone through the window lattice onto her jade-like face. Ningxu continued Zigui's unfinished words and continued, that jade hairpin, is it mine? Zigui gritted his teeth. Yes. Young miss, the Yun residence has already taken the pouch to the capital to report to the officials and have someone come to pick you up. This matter quickly reached the ears of the heavens. I have just reported it to the master. The master ordered me to immediately take you out of the city and hide in a manor outside the city. He would deal with this matter. Young miss, let us leave quickly. The current emperor hated witchcraft the most. He had ordered many times that if anyone practiced witchcraft, they would be beheaded without mercy. Forsythia was shocked and terrified. She knew the severity of the matter and hurriedly started to pack up the important things. However, she was interrupted by Ningxu. She lowered her thick black eyelashes and pondered deeply for only a moment. Countless thoughts had already spun in her mind. She then raised her eyes and said calmly, let us leave, but not outside the city. We will go to another place. Where is Lady Ning? His Majesty has decreed to bring her to the Supreme Court for trial. The morning bell of the 1000 Buddha temple on the outskirts of the city had just rung, waking up the bustling city of the capital. The gates of the High Duke's public house were firmly blocked by officials from the capital. The governor of the capital, Wei Zicheng, personally led the troops and banged on the doors of the High Duke's public house. The surrounding people who had heard the news quickly crowded the entire Vermilion Bird Street. Every pair of eyes was shining brightly. Ning Deyuan personally opened the door. Governor Wei, please excuse me for not coming out to meet you. What crime did my daughter commit? Wei Zicheng gave a perfunctory salute and said in a businesslike manner, High Duke, you should have already heard what happened. Please do not make things difficult for us. This case has already been submitted to His Majesty overnight. His Majesty has approved it and ordered us to bring Lady Ning to justice. Please come out immediately and follow us to prison. His tone clearly indicated that he would not be kind today. Ning Deyuan did not beat around the bush and said directly, my daughter felt unwell a few days ago. I have already sent someone to send her back to her hometown in Jiangnan. If there is any crime, I will bear it for her. Wei Zicheng sneered. High Duke, what you mean is that Lady Ning has already escaped. She must have received the news this morning. She can't have run far. Men, immediately send a message to the guards to capture the fugitive. The rest of you, follow me and invite the High Duke to the prison to catch up. Chapter 16. With an order, dozens of soldiers surrounded Ning Deyuan, wanting to take him away. Princess Hashin immediately rushed out with the people from the residence. The house of Duke was in a mess. The first branch and the third branch watched from the side. Ning Wn held Madame Yang's hand excitedly and nervously, thinking, Ning Shu is finished now. There were countless whispers around them. It seems that the rumors are true. It was really Lady Ning who murdered young Master Yun. The house of Duke is really unlucky this time. Yes, I've long heard that Lady Ning's life carries poison and can kill all 9 generations. Isn't it coming true now? The 3 young masters are so pitiful. They were harmed by her at such a young age. It's too tragic. Duke Ning's reputation of the past few years will be completely ruined. Isn't it? Giving birth to a daughter like Shu is really a disaster. At this moment, a delicate and soft voice suddenly came from the residence. There was a hint of laziness in the voice, as if she was really awakened by the rude noise outside. Are the lords looking for me? Following that voice, a light green figure stepped over the high threshold and slowly walked out. The girl's figure was slender and straight, like the first blooming orchid by the green lake in spring. She didn't expect to see Ning Shu again. Ning Wan's expression suddenly changed. Didn't she run away? She actually dared to come back. Then she thought, since she's not afraid of death, then I'll let people see with their own eyes how Ning Shu walks to her death step by step. How delightful. Shua. Ning De Yuan and He Xin also didn't expect her to come out. Didn't Ming Zigui take her away? Could it be that she didn't want to implicate them? Both of them felt heartache and relief. This girl is too stubborn. But what should we do now? They saw Ning Shu's clear eyes slowly sweeping around, her gaze lightly drifting over everyone's faces. Then she smiled, slowly bent her knees, and shyly bowed to Wei Zicheng and the others. My daughter was too sleepy in spring and didn't have the time to personally greet the lords. Please forgive me. Wei Zicheng narrowed his eyes at her. The muscles on his face twitched, and he said with a fake smile, "It's good that Lady Ning didn't run away." Then come with us. Ning Shu bowed and stood up. She raised her head, her face full of doubt. If Sir wants to take me, I have no reason to resist. It's just that I don't know what crime I've committed. Wei Zicheng scolded coldly, "Are you trying to cover up what you did? You tried to murder the second son of the Yun family, Cloud Leaf. He's the husband who divorced you a few days ago." Ning Shu was even more confused. Why would my daughter want to kill her own husband? Wei Zicheng narrowed his eyes impatiently and voiced out the thoughts of the spectators. Who knows? Lady Ning married 3 husbands in a row and none of them had a good ending. Either you're fated to be evil and transformed into a demon, wanting to jinx all the outstanding men in our country. Or, you have another lover and are dissatisfied with the 3 marriages that the Duke arranged for you, so you did something evil on a whim. You wanted to kill the 3 of them and then have illicit relations with your lover. Or, there might be other unspeakable reasons that we don't know. There are witnesses and evidence in this matter. I advise Lady Ning not to waste our time. Witnesses and evidence. Ning Shu bowed again. Her posture was very humble, and it was obvious that she was sincerely asking for advice. My daughter doesn't know at all. Please enlighten me. It seems that Lady Ning won't give up until all hope is gone. Wei Zicheng snorted coldly. He took out a pouch from his chest and raised it above his head. He said loudly, "This pouch was dug out from under the begonia tree in young Master Yun's courtyard. Does the jade hairpin inside belong to you?" Ning Shu examined it carefully and nodded. Yes. Wei Zicheng's eyes widened. Then this pouch and the talisman inside belong to you without a doubt. The evidence is irrefutable. Do you still want to deny it? The people around them nodded. How could they deny it when the evidence was irrefutable? If Lady Ning continued to deny it, she would be too shameless. At this moment, the sound of a few horses galloping on the ground broke the deadlock. The one sitting on the leading brown horse was the current 6th prince, Xiao Yuni. He urged his horse to rush over and shouted, "No one can touch her." Chapter 17. Xiao Yuni's forehead was full of sweat. It was obvious that he had rushed over as soon as he heard the news. The young prince jumped off his horse and walked to Ning Shu. He said sincerely, "Shu, you don't have to be afraid. I believe that this matter has nothing to do with you. I'll go to the palace to see father and ask him to investigate thoroughly to prove your innocence." The moment she saw him, Ning Wan's heart clenched. There were also young ladies from other aristocratic families watching by the side, and the discussion was endless. They were all amazed at what kind of demon Ning Shu was. Previously, when Cloudleaf was killed, he chased her for 3 miles. Now, the dignified 6th prince was going to risk universal condemnation for her. The 7th prince, Xiao Yunsen, who had rushed over with Xiao Yuni, watched the show with great interest. The 13th princess, Xiao Zhongping, snorted coldly and rolled her eyes. Wei Zicheng and the others bowed to the princes and princesses. Xiao Yuni casually raised his hand and told them not to stand on ceremony, but his eyes were fixed on Ning Shu. His punches were full of meaning, and it was impossible not to admire him. If it were other young ladies, they would be willing to die for the 6th prince. But Ning Shu, she took a step back, nodded with a smile, and curtsied. Her etiquette and expression were all considerate, but it made people feel alienated, as if she was thousands of miles away. Thank you for your kindness, Your Highness, but Ning Shu can deal with this matter on her own. Xiao Yuni's hot blood immediately cooled down. His dark eyes reflected the young lady's elegant and straight figure. He watched as she turned sideways and continued to smile at Wei Zicheng, but not at him. The people around them were even more excited. Hey, this Lady Ning is strange. It was so difficult for the 6th prince to protect her, but she doesn't know what's good for her. Is she really not afraid of death? Ning Shu continued, Magistrate, I can't accept the irrefutable evidence you speak of. I'm afraid you don't know this, but our duke's household has a long history. My grandmother, father, and mother have treated me well. Therefore, if there aren't 100 of these jade hairpins on my dressing table, there are at least 10 of them. It's common for me to lose a few of them in a moment of carelessness, or for them to be stolen and sold by the servants in the household for money. I never take it to heart. Moreover, I've been busy preparing for the wedding. Countless pairs of eyes are watching, so how could I sneak into the residence of Yun and plant something like this in young Master Yun's courtyard to harm him? You said that I wanted to curse third young master to death, but I still want to seek justice from the Supreme Court. Someone wants to frame me. What a glib tongue. Ning Shu refuted the evidence with a few hundred words. Wei Zicheng's face twisted and he was almost speechless. Fortunately, he quickly thought of another point and reprimanded her. Do you think you have the ability to deceive everyone? You said that you were busy and countless pairs of eyes were watching to testify for you. However, on that night 3 days ago, you sneaked out. Where did you go? Don't think that no one saw you. Ning Shu quickly followed. Who was that person? It was Wang Enyang, the woman who was on night watch in your household. After the incident, this woman couldn't help but feel guilty. She ran to the Jingji prefecture at 5 in the morning and confessed everything. This official and the Supreme Court didn't disappoint the emperor and successfully pinned your crime. What else do you have to say? Ning Shu's eyes were firm. I still have questions. You said that Wang Enyang saw me sneaking out on the night 3 days ago. First, how would she know why I went out? Second, if she suspected me of doing evil, why didn't she report it to the authorities for a total of 32 hours in the past 3 days? Why did she only report it this morning? Third, I heard that young Master Yun's illness acted up at 5 in the morning and that the jade hairpin was dug out at 5 in the morning. Even my father only heard the news at 5 in the morning. How could a woman who was on night watch in the residence know about this earlier than her master and rush to the Jingji prefecture, which is 10 miles away from the House of Duke, to report it to the authorities at 5 in the morning? There are many suspicious points in this. Forgive Ning Shu for not being convinced. Chapter 18. Ning Shu's voice was steady and firm, like lustrous pearls that landed on a jade plate, lightly knocking on everyone's hearts. Immediately, all the discussions quieted down. Even Wei Zicheng was speechless, not knowing how to refute. Everyone had different expressions. Xiao Yuni was sad and happy. The girl he liked was indeed extraordinary. The 7th prince became even more excited, while the 13th princess had an awkward look on her face, saying, "What are you showing off for?" Only Ning Deyuan and He Xin's joy was simple and straightforward. On the side, Ning Wan, who had been watching quietly, suddenly gasped, a terrified expression on her face. She shook her head at Ning Shu and said, "Elder sister, I don't know anything." Ning Wan blurted out and hurriedly covered her mouth in fear, but everyone's eyes were already on her. The crowd that had just quieted down was in an uproar again, even livelier than before. Ning Shu turned back and looked at her quietly. Her eyes were cold and she laughed in her heart. "So the ghost beside me was you. Before, She only thought that Ning Wan's little tricks behind her back were just her younger daughter crying out of jealousy and did not really bear a grudge. She was reborn this time to protect the mansion, but she did not think that she would be stabbed by someone in the mansion. Wei Ziqing immediately went in front of Ning Wan and encouraged her, "Second Miss Ning, please tell us everything you know. With His Majesty's protection, are you still afraid of her?" Ning Wan still covered her mouth and did not speak. Her eyes were filled with fear and her eyes were red, looking like tears were about to fall. Wei Ziqing added, "If you don't say it, are you going to let her continue to harm people in the future?" If he had only come to carry out the Emperor's orders at the beginning, he had fallen into bigotry now. He was the capital's magistrate and had been an official for 20 years. How many major cases had he solved? Who would have thought that he would be defeated by a teenage girl in front of everyone today? If Ning Shu was really able to get away with it, then he, Wei Ziqing, would lose his face in front of the Duke's mansion today. Ning Wan bit her lips hard. She struggled for a long time before she was convinced. She slowly took a deep breath and muttered, Three nights ago, I was about to go to sleep, but I suddenly remembered that Dajeje's marriage had been bumpy again and again. She must be feeling uncomfortable and unable to sleep, so I hesitated again and again before going to her room to accompany her and help her relieve the depression in her heart. However, when I arrived at her room, I discovered that there was no one inside. Eldest sister had left at some point. I was afraid that she would take things too hard, so I hurried to ask the servant girl in her courtyard. The maidservants all said they didn't know, until they found an old woman who was patrolling at night. According to the woman, she seemed to have seen her elder sister quietly change her clothes and leave through the small door. As she walked out, she vaguely said something along the lines of, "It's all young Master Yun's fault for ruining her reputation. I must make him pay with his life." When I heard that, I was horrified and hurriedly begged the woman not to publicize it. Because of this, I could not sit still for the past few days. I didn't expect the woman to be so timid and still say it. Originally, for the sake of Dajeje, I would never say it, but if someone else were to be harmed, I would really die of shame. Please don't hold a grudge against me, Dajeje. As she spoke, Ning Wan's tears fell. She bent her knees and was about to kneel in front of Ning Shu to beg for forgiveness, but she was stopped by the people around her. Wei Ziqing laughed loudly and was extremely carefree. If Wang Enyang's words are not convincing, then the second miss of the Ning residence has come out personally to prove that Ning Shu really wasn't in the residence 3 nights ago. Then, where did she go? Who can prove it? If she can't prove her innocence, then the incident at the residence of Yun is her doing. There's no denying it. Lady Ning, what else do you have to say? Chapter 19. Forsythia rushed out and said anxiously, "I have always been with my young miss. I can testify for my young miss that she definitely did not do anything to harm young Master Yun." Ning Wan wiped her tears with a handkerchief and said, "Forsythia, you are eldest sister's personal maidservant and grew up together with her. I know you want to protect her, just like how I feel as her younger sister, but this is a human life. We can't ignore our conscience for the sake of loyalty and kinship." Forsythia wanted to pounce over and bite her to death, but there were so many people here and she could not do anything. She was so angry that her eyes turned red. Wei Ziqing put his hands behind his back and looked down at Ning Shu with a cold smile. "Eldest young miss, this is your last chance. Where did you go that night 3 days ago? Other than the maidservant Forsythia, are there any other witnesses?" Ning Shu seemed to have finally accepted her fate. She lowered her head and gripped the handkerchief in her hand tightly as she shook her head with difficulty. "No. That's right. Men, take Lady Ning down immediately and bring her back for trial." At that moment, more than 10 officers surrounded Ning Shu and Forsythia with their swords. They took out shackles and raised them in front of Ning Shu, waiting for the last moment. Xiao Yuni was about to speak when he heard, "Wait." A horse carriage rolled into the crowd leisurely. The young man driving the carriage waved the horsewhip in his hand and shouted. He looked handsome and was obviously from a noble family. A few sharp-eyed people in the crowd immediately said, "This is the carriage of the Prince Pingnan's heir." Yes. When the heir entered the capital yesterday, I watched from the Black Tortoise Avenue. It was indescribably lively. I remember that the carriage was this one. Then the person sitting inside must be the Prince Pingnan's heir. When the words South Pacifying King's heir were mentioned, the young girls in the crowd immediately let out low gasps of surprise. Their faces were flushed, and they were extremely expectant. However, what they were even more curious about was, why did this mysterious heir come here? The 13th princess immediately tightened her grip on the reins. She stared at him, her eyes filled with the expectation of a young girl. A look of surprise flashed past Xiao Yunyi's eyes, but Xiao Yunsen still had that bored expression of watching the show. The horse carriage was leisurely, the carriage was leisurely, and even the young man driving the carriage was leisurely. When the carriage reached the entrance of the public house and was less than 10 feet away from Wei Ziyicheng, he shouted and ordered the horse to stop. Wei Ziyicheng hurriedly stopped what he was doing, stepped forward, and bowed. His etiquette seemed to be even more respectful than when he had bowed to the 6th prince and the 7th prince. Your Highness. Currently, His Majesty had 6 princes. Ordinary people only thought that the status of the dragon's son was incomparably noble. Naturally, he was more honorable than the children of the other princes' families. Of course, this was only a misunderstanding. Under the heavens, the emperor was the most respected. Below him was the crown prince. Below him were the various princes, Wang, heir apparent, and other princes who had received titles. The Prince Pingnan's lineage was the Prince Pingnan's lineage when the country was founded. The current Prince Pingnan only had one legitimate son, Xiahou Qing. The throne had long been set in stone. After Emperor Jingming ascended the throne, the position of crown prince had been undecided. Therefore, although Xiao Yunyi and the others were the royal sons, their status was half a level lower than Xiahou Qing's. It was silent behind the curtain. After a while, there were intermittent coughs. Everyone curiously looked over, wanting to see the Prince Pingnan's face. However, the person in the carriage did not come out. He only said one sentence. 3 days ago, Lady Ning and I were together. There was a moment of silence. Then cold water was poured into a pot of oil. In an instant, it caused a stir. Everyone's eyes widened. Chapter 20. 2 hours ago, at Prince Nanping's residence. What are you doing here? The person opposite her sat in front of a table with a pot of tea emitting a faint fragrance. The silver charcoal in the corner of the room was still burning at the end of March. It was probably the only one in the capital. The aroma of the tea mixed with the faint duheng fragrance in the silver charcoal, making the air warm and cozy. Ning Xu had been waiting outside the prince's residence for half an hour. The morning breeze still carried a trace of coldness, causing her cheeks to feel cold. As soon as she stepped into the room, in less than half a year, her face was steamed into a crimson red. Ning Xu untied her cloak and did not treat herself as a guest at all. She smiled and walked over to sit across from him. Your Highness the Crown Prince has arrived in the capital a few days ago. This little girl is here to welcome you. Just yesterday, Xiahou Qing finally appeared. He openly entered the capital through the Shunwu Gate and entered the palace to meet the emperor. Yesterday, the entire capital was in an uproar. All the young girls in the city who yearned for love came out. In addition to countless people who came to watch the fun, the entire Xuanwu street was packed. Thousands of young girls screamed and threw flowers, purses, and fragrant handkerchiefs at the prince's residence like raindrops. They almost drowned the carriage, hoping to catch a glimpse of the legendary prince's true appearance. The news of Xiahou Qing's return spread to every corner of the capital at the fastest speed. At this time, Xiahou Qing was wearing a silver cloak and fox fur coat. Because Ning Xu suddenly came to visit, he did not tie up his black hair and let it fall to the side of his body. It made him look even more like an immortal. Of course, his voice was also like an immortal's, cold and distant. If it's nonsense, you can get lost. Ning Xu personally held the pot and poured a cup of tea. She handed it to Xiahou Qing and said sincerely, "Then I will not beat around the bush with your Highness. Your Highness should already know. I am here to beg you." Xiahou Qing did not take the cup of tea. Obviously, he disdained to respond to her kindness. Beg me for what? Ning Shu did not get angry. She brought the cup of tea back to herself and said slowly, last night, young Master Yun of the Cloud Leaf suddenly fell ill and fainted. The Yun family invited the imperial physician to treat him. Imperial Censor Yun ordered a thorough investigation of the entire residence and found my hairpin and a talisman under the begonia tree in young Master Yun's courtyard. Her calamity was imminent, but he was not the least bit moved. His fingers gently twirled the ivory handle, and his expression was very proud. What does that have to do with me? Ning Shu's eyes unconsciously looked at his hand. She took a closer look and found that the small thing Xiahou Qing had been playing with was not an elephant's tusk, but a human bone. It was the very end of a person's little finger. Ning Shu suppressed the surprise in her heart. Her fingertips touched the blue porcelain cup in front of her after the rain. Her lips curled into a warm smile. Because 3 days ago, in the middle of the night, I secretly left the residence and met your highness at the Qi family's ancestral grave. We had a pleasant conversation. At that time, there were only you, me, my maid Forsythia, and this handsome little brother Huimo beside you. There was no one else. At the side, when Ning Shu suddenly mentioned the word handsome, Huimo could not help but blush. He was angry that this Lady Ning really liked to tease people. However, he was even more confused. He didn't understand what eldest young Miss Ning and his young master Shizzy were talking about. What was the connection between the Yun family finding her hairpin and the chance encounter 3 days ago? However, his young master seemed to be completely clear. Ning Shu continued, I thought that night, someone would use it to attack my weakness and make a big fuss about it. Forsythia is my personal maid. Her words will not be trusted. I hope that your highness can provide me with an alibi to block the mouths of those people and avoid this disaster to prove my innocence. Originally, the talisman and the jade hairpin could not be used as the irrefutable evidence that she murdered Cloud Leaf. However, since the Emperor of Yu, countless people believed in God. At this moment, the Yun family's anger must be poured on her. Coupled with the sudden death of young General Song and third young Master Qi, countless dirty water will be poured on her. She will definitely be known as a demoness who brings disaster to the country. In order to appease the anger of the people, it was hard to guarantee that the emperor will not kill her to prevent future troubles. At that time, even her father will be implicated. He snorted and leaned on the brocade cushion. All of this had nothing to do with him. This is your business. Why should I help you? Because I can also help you. Help me with what? For example, the poison in your body is called plum blossom kiss. It is also the poison that killed the previous emperor. As soon as she finished speaking, Hui Mo, who was quietly waiting by the side, took a deep breath and took a step forward. His eyes were full of surprise. How did you know? They had kept this secret for 11 years. Except for the old prince, there was no fourth person who knew. This Lady Ning, did she really have a great ability? Chapter 21. Hui Mo had a murderous look in his eyes. But he saw his young master raise his hand. Hui Mo hid his murderous look and retreated behind him. Xiahou Qing's indifferent face finally showed a trace of interest. He was even more interested than 3 days ago. He seemed to see her in a new light. You didn't disgrace the name of Master Hui Ci. Go on. Ning Shu took a deep breath. I also heard it by chance. The plum blossom kiss is the most terrible poison in the world. It is colorless and tasteless. The poisoned person can't detect it and only 5 plum blossom petals will slowly grow on the side of the neck. Every time a plum blossom petal grows, it means that the person loses a sense of shape, sound, smell, taste, and touch. When all 5 petals bloom, the person loses all 5 senses. When the stamen finally forms, the person will die due to the loss of internal organs. Back then, when she helped Xiao Yuni win the throne, she had accidentally read about this poison in a secret file in the palace. The file was vague, only mentioning how terrifying this poison was and that the previous emperor had died from this poison. As for who had poisoned him and how he had poisoned him, there was no mention at all. After that, this poison was listed as a forbidden item by the emperor. It was sealed together with the palace chaos 25 years ago. Whoever dared to mention it would be beheaded immediately. So when Ning Shu heard that there were 4 red spots on the side of Cloudleaf's neck, her heart was in turmoil. In a moment, many thoughts came to her mind. It was no wonder that the imperial physician who treated Yun Fei was so terrified and immediately reported it to the heavens. Once the imperial physician confirmed the diagnosis, she, who was framed for sneaking into the Yun manor to cast the curse, would be involved with this poison. This matter would be a dead end. At the same time, many things that she didn't understand also had clues, such as, and I guessed that your highness was poisoned because, first, your eyesight coincides with the shape of the plum blossom kiss. Second, 3 days ago when you went to pay respects to the 3rd young Master Qi, the coffin was opened by me. The smell was so strong that even your subordinates couldn't help but cover their noses. But you didn't move at all at that time, so I boldly guessed that your sense of smell was damaged, which coincides with the smell of the plum blossom kiss. Third, I found out after entering the room, your clothes. He pinched the small half of the finger bone in his palm. His knuckles, which were covered with blue veins, lightly tapped on the table. Is there anything wrong with my attire? Ning Shu shook her head. I didn't overlook anything. It's just that I have a slight doubt. The whole country knows that your highness has been ill since childhood. Patients who are afraid of the cold will naturally wear more clothes than others. This is very normal. But at this moment, your room is burning with silver charcoal. Even if it is chilly outside, your room is extremely warm. You shouldn't be afraid of the cold. Yet you're still wearing a cloak and a fox fur coat, which seems a little deliberate. I couldn't help but feel suspicious. Are you trying to hide something? Looking at the fox fur coat on your neck, I might as well make a bold guess. I'm afraid there are several plum blossoms silently blooming on the side of your neck right now. As for how many petals there are, I don't dare to say. She didn't want to say too much to the unfathomable crown prince in front of her, but the situation was stronger than the person. The only way to break through this situation was with him. In order to protect her family, she could only think of a way to persuade him to cooperate with her. Listening to her gradually unraveling the clues, her voice soft and firm, Xiahou Qing's lips suddenly bloomed into a cold smile. 3 petals, he said, his tone as light as the cool spring breeze outside the prince's mansion. He slowly stood up. The silver fox fur coat suddenly fell to the ground, revealing his pale neck. 2 inches above his collarbone, there was impressively 3 blood-red plum blossoms. It was frighteningly dazzling. He lifted his feet and slowly walked towards her. When I was 10 years old, the first petal grew on the side of my neck. Since then, I have completely lost my sense of smell. Father invited all the famous doctors in the country, but no one could cure me. When I was 17, the second petal grew, and I completely lost my sense of smell. At the end of last year, on the day I turned 20, the 3rd petal began to grow, and I gradually lost my sight. With only 2 petals left, the poison will take effect. Guess, can I live past 25 years old? Chapter 22. His tone was very calm, but in just a few short sentences, she could hear the stormy waves that made her heart tremble. A person could only watch as they lost their 5 senses bit by bit without being able to do anything. This kind of hopeless feeling of helplessness could easily crush a person. Not to mention him. Even the Empress had praised the Xiahou Qing that when she saw him, everything in the world would pale in comparison to Xiahou Qing. The more arrogant a person was, the more unbearable it would be. But he could still remain so calm and even ridicule himself. This man, she respected and feared him. After a few steps, he walked in front of her. His eyes seemed to be separated by a layer of black brocade as he looked down at her face that could not be seen clearly. Today, I can help you. But what do you have to trade with me? She knelt in front of the desk and tilted her head to look at him. This posture made her seem weak, but she didn't care. She didn't call him you anymore, and her tone became more serious. I can help you find out the secret of this poison. He took another step closer and bent down to ask, I've investigated for 11 years and still couldn't find the person who poisoned me. If you still can't find it before I die, what will you do? His face was only inches away from hers. He saw her skin as white as snow and his hair as black as ink. The two of them could smell each other's breaths. Her back was very straight as she faced him. Her words were serious and simple. "Then I'll be buried with you." At this moment, Ning Shu looked at the carriage that had arrived just in time, and her slightly worried heart slowly relaxed. She thought, this man really doesn't want to waste any time and came at the right time. Isn't he afraid that I'll be worried half to death? No, maybe this is his bad taste. She cursed in her heart, but she put on a polite smile on her face. She curtsied to the person in the carriage. "Thank you, Your Highness, for clearing my daughter's name." Ning Shu was actually with this Xiao Qing. And at night, Xiao Yunyi's thin and handsome face immediately changed and his hands subconsciously clenched under his sleeves. The 13th princess's eyes that had been looking at the Wang Fu's carriage were filled with fire. The onlookers were confused. No one had expected things to turn out this way. Lady Ning was at loggerheads with young Master Yun one moment, then His Highness the 6th Prince came to protect her the next moment. Not long after, Prince Nanping appeared to testify on her behalf. There were so many twists and turns in the process, and it was really lively. Even though Wei Zicheng had been on the job for 20 years, his heart was in turmoil at this moment. He paused for a moment and asked, "Your humble servant boldly asks Your Highness, why were you with Lady Ning that night, together?" As everyone knew, Xiao Qing had just entered the capital yesterday to meet the emperor. How could he have met Ning Shu 3 days ago? The person behind the curtain reclined on the couch and said steadily, "This time I came to the capital to meet the emperor and traveled for 3 days to the outskirts of the capital. My body occasionally felt unwell, so I stopped at the outskirts of the capital to rest. Afterwards, I suddenly remembered that the 3rd young Master Chi's resting place was nearby. I was an old friend of his, so I went to pay my respects to him in the middle of the night to comfort my nostalgia. I didn't expect to meet Lady Ning wiping her tears at the tombstone and missing Brother Jin so much. The two of us chatted through the night and reminisced about Brother Jin's past until dawn." What? For a moment, Wei Zicheng's expression was extremely strange, as if he had accidentally eaten a fly. At the same time, he thought, this is too strange. It's still possible for Prince Xiao to pay his respects to the 3rd young Master Qi, but this Lady Ning has been marrying again and again. If she really can't let go of 3rd young Master Qi, why would she marry into the Yun family in such a short time? Who are you trying to fool? At the same time, he thought, His Highness has always lived in Yunyang province, thousands of miles away, and rarely returns to the capital. He has no relationship with this Lady Ning, so there's no reason for him to lie for her. Therefore, his face was full of confusion, and 2 more wrinkles appeared between his brows. Hearing his silence, the person behind the curtain tapped his knuckles lightly on the table 3 times, then said slowly, "Why, you don't believe my words?" His tone was extremely light and slow, like a feather. But for some reason, it made Wei Zicheng break out in a cold sweat, and his entire back felt cold. Chapter 23. Wei Zicheng hurriedly stepped forward and bowed. "How would I dare? Since Your Highness can testify, it is impossible for Lady Ning to go to the Yun residence to commit murder 3 days ago. Someone must have framed her. I will report this to His Majesty. Catch the culprit who framed Lady Ning behind the scenes." Who would not believe it? Who would dare to not believe it? Even if his identity was not mentioned. Although this crown prince had problems with his eyes and body, he was the Xiao Qing who had defeated the entire Privy Council all those years ago. His Majesty had praised him as an unparalleled talent after he offered a single plan to force the Xiongnu to retreat. At that time, all the civil and military officials were shocked. If he was not there, it would have been hard to believe. That was 11 years ago, when he was only 10 years old. A large group of officials came in a grandiose manner, and in less than 2 hours, they returned in a grandiose manner. The onlookers smacked their lips as if they hadn't had enough yet. They gradually dispersed in all directions, bringing along today's great excitement to find someone to share this wonderful topic of conversation. There were also many young girls who did not want to give up. They tiptoed and desperately looked into the mysterious carriage. Then, they were slapped back home by their parents and brothers. Ning Shu pressed her right hand against her left hand and raised it to her forehead. She politely bowed to Xiahou Qing in the carriage and said in a sweet voice, "Today, I thank your highness for telling the truth and proving my innocence. I am so grateful that I shed tears. In the next life, I will repay your kindness." The person in the carriage supported his chin with his hand and sneered. It seemed that he was mocking her for deliberately pretending to be obedient. Repaying kindness in the next life. What about in this life? Wasn't it just pulling her aside? This woman's heart was full of twists and turns. He had fulfilled his promise today and did not want to waste time here. He said faintly, "Let's go." Hui Mo immediately waved his horsewhip and smiled at Ning Shu before driving the carriage away. Since this Lady Ning had reached an agreement with his master and promised to help him find the culprit, then they were in cahoots. Their previous grudges were written off. Watching Xiahou Qing's carriage leave, Xiao Yuni, who had been watching from the side, immediately walked to Ning Shu's side and grabbed her hand. "Shu, how did you get to know him?" His expression was awkward and arrogant. "What do you mean by coincidental meeting at 3 different times of the day, holding candlelight and chatting all night until dawn?" Every word made him burn with rage. Ning Shu calmly turned around to avoid his hand and walked to her mother's side. She smiled at him and said, "Your Highness has misunderstood. I'm not familiar with His Highness the Crown Prince. Everything is just a coincidence. I think Your Highness is kind-hearted and doesn't want to see an innocent person being wronged, so you came to speak up for justice. Then why did you go to Qi San's tomb so late at night? Don't tell me you still." Xiao Yuni was still young and had not learned to be as shrewd as he was back then, so he immediately asked. Could it be that she was still thinking about that dead person? It shouldn't be like this. Before Shu'er became of marriageable age, the two of them were so harmonious and could be considered childhood sweethearts. At that time, Shu'er's eyes were shining when she looked at him. But he didn't know why she suddenly changed a year ago. From young General Song to Qi Huaijin, and then to that crying cloud leaf who couldn't even protect himself. She could accept anyone, but she just didn't want to choose him. Ning Shu shook her head softly. Although third young Master Qi and I haven't gotten married yet, we were still engaged. It's my duty to visit him often, and it's also my private matter. I won't disturb Your Highness from worrying. Xiao Yuni's expression darkened even more. He clenched his fists until the veins on the back of his hand popped out. He gritted his teeth and looked at her stubbornly. "Do you think that I didn't help you just now, so you're deliberately saying this to anger me? That's not it. Shu'er, remember, even if that Xiahou Qing didn't come just now, as long as I, Xiao Yuni, am here, I won't let anyone hurt you. If you don't believe me, look behind you." With that said, he turned and got on his horse, urging it to leave. The scarlet cloak fluttered and the dust raised by the galloping horse's hooves was like the young prince's tumbling heart. The 13th princess walked in front of her, narrowing her eyes and saying domineeringly, "I hope you remember what you said just now. You're not familiar with Prince Xiahou at all, and I'm warning you, you're not allowed to be familiar with him in the future." Chapter 24. The 3 highnesses left one after another and the commotion at the entrance of the Duke's manor finally dissipated and it was quiet again. Ning Shu secretly breathed a sigh of relief, feeling that it was dangerous and had a headache. She had already said so much, but why was Xiao Yuni still so stubborn and not letting go of her, this crooked tree? But it was a good thing that the disaster was temporarily solved and she could finally breathe. Ning Deyuan immediately smiled and said, okay, it's all right now. Shu'er, are you shocked? Come, help your mother back to the manor with father to rest." Ning Shu held her mother's hand affectionately and smiled sweetly at Ning Deyuan. "Shu'er is innocent, so I'm not afraid. But I've troubled father and mother again. Let's go greet grandmother quickly, lest she worries." Halfway there, she suddenly thought of something. "Hey, we seem to have forgotten something." She carefully pondered for a moment and suddenly came to a realization. Then, she turned her head to look at Yang Shi and her daughter, who were desperately trying to reduce their presence in the corner. Her pink lips curled up, and her eyes were like water as she smiled sweetly. "Second sister, I almost forgot. There seems to be some debt between us sisters that hasn't been settled, don't you think? Ning Wan's face paled immediately. The 3 branches of the Duke's manor were all present in the main hall. The old madam was in the first position, followed by Ning de Yuan and the other branches. It was so quiet in the hall that you could hear a pin drop. Everyone had different thoughts and their expressions were not good, but no one said anything. Only Ning Shu picked up the fresh March fruit that had just been sent up from the farm with a normal expression and carefully peeled the skin for the old madam and Princess Hashin to enjoy, smiling faintly. But the more she was like this, the more uneasy Ning Wan, who was standing beside Madame Yang, was. She held Madame Yang's hand tightly, as if this was the only way she could let Madame Yang keep her safe. After a short and long silence, Madame Yang secretly took a deep breath. She seemed to have made up her mind, and in an instant, she put on a big smile, walked in front of Ning Shu, and affectionately held her hand. Shu, you can't blame your second sister for what happened this morning. It was all because of that traitorous Wang Enyang. Your second sister was also deceived. She didn't really want to harm you. You mustn't misunderstand. When First Auntie brings that Wang Enyang back, I will definitely teach her a lesson to appease your anger. Her words and gestures were full of indignation for Ning Shu, as if she could not wait to give Wang Enyang 100 beatings on the spot. She was good at acting, and Ning Shu was even better at it. Ning Shu tilted her head slightly and asked suspiciously, "Eldest aunt, what are you talking about? How could I misunderstand second sister?" Then she glanced at Forsythia. Forsythia immediately repeated what Ning Wan had said in front of everyone this morning without missing a single word. I heard from the old woman that she seemed to have seen eldest sister quietly changing and leaving through the small door. When she walked out, she vaguely said something like, "It's all young Master Yun's fault for ruining her reputation. I must make him pay with his life." When I heard it, I was shocked and quickly begged the old woman not to spread the news. When she heard her seemingly righteous words but in fact evil intentions, Ning Wan lowered her face in embarrassment. She didn't dare to face the different gazes of the crowd and clenched her nails so hard that they were about to break. Ning Shu's eyes shifted and she rebuked Madame Yang. "Elders, listen to me. Second sister defended me so much and helped me beg Wang Enyang not to spread the news. I can't thank her enough, let alone blame her. First Auntie, you have misunderstood Shu. Madame Yang used all her strength to maintain the fake smile on her face. Yes. Our Shu has been intelligent and magnanimous since young. How could Wang Enyang sow discord in your sisterly relationship? First Auntie has misunderstood you. First Auntie apologizes to you." The last sentence made her heart bleed. However, their vicious plan had failed and they had been exposed. No matter how much resentment she had in her heart, she had to swallow it into her stomach. Even if she had to throw away her old face, she had to protect her precious daughter today. Chapter 25. I knew eldest aunt understands me the best. Ning Shu intimately leaned on Madame Yang, causing Madame Yang to feel as if she had been pricked by a needle, but her heart was slightly relieved. However, Ning Shu quickly spoke again. "However, there are a few points that I really don't understand. Would eldest aunt please enlighten me?" Madame Yang's heart, which had been half relieved, was raised again. She said with trepidation, "Please speak." Ning Shu pondered for a moment and frowned. With a puzzled expression, she said, "Shu is also insensible and often makes small mistakes that make the people around her worry. However, I have no enmity with that Wang Enyang, so why would she lie and say that she heard I wanted to harm young Master Yun? She even spread the news everywhere, first deceiving second sister, then deceiving the Jingji provincial guard." Madame Yang pretended to think for a moment and said, "That Wang Enyang is not young, more than 50 years old. At such an old age, it is normal for her to be deaf and blind. Furthermore, her eldest son was an idiot. She could imagine that as his mother, there was something wrong with his head as well. He had been suspicious all day long, but he never thought that he would suspect eldest young miss and almost harmed her. Our residents can no longer use such an evil servant. Later, eldest aunt will make the decision for you and sell off her entire family. Don't you think so, old madam?" Madame Yang smiled weakly at the old lady, hoping that this would be over soon. Ning Shu suddenly exclaimed and clapped her hands. Ah! There are more than 300 servants in the residence. I have been in the residence for more than 10 years, and there are still many that I am not familiar with. I can't even remember some of their names, let alone their family background. I didn't expect eldest aunt to be able to tell Wang Enyang, the most inconspicuous person in the residence, everything about her family. Shu is really impressed. Grandmother, don't you think eldest aunt is very powerful? Madame Yang felt a chill run down her spine. Everyone's eyes instantly gathered on Madame Yang. Ning Wan couldn't even breathe. Even Ning Dehuai, who wanted to protect Madame Yang at first, frowned and felt that he was losing face. Old Madame Yang looked at the eldest branch with a cold expression, extremely unhappy. Staring at dozens of icicles, even Madame Yang's skin of copper and bones of iron felt weak. But in the next moment, she fiercely gritted her teeth. Even if everyone could see that it was her and her daughter's doing, so what? She had secretly sent someone to pass a message to Wang Enyang and took away Wang Enyang's precious daughter. Even if Wang Enyang was a fool, she should know what to do. As long as none of them had any evidence, then no one could do anything to her and her daughter. She raised her chin and sneered, "There are so many servants in our manor. It's hard to guarantee that there won't be a few with malicious intentions to harm their master. I just had the extra thought to understand every servant in the manor. See, isn't it useful now? Does Shu have anything else to say? If not, eldest aunt is feeling a little dizzy. I'll take Wan back to rest first." She walked back to her seat, took Ning Shu's hand and was about to leave. Ning Shu immediately went forward and begged, "Aunt, don't be anxious. There's still another matter. Shu can only ask you to solve the case." Madame Yang could no longer maintain her composure. "What else do you want? That is, who stole my jade hairpin?" Ning Shu frowned, her eyes full of worry. "That jade hairpin was made for me by my mother when I was of age. It's a unique design in the capital, so I cherish it very much. I don't wear it often, but I often play with it. I clearly remember seeing it 5 days ago. How could it suddenly appear in the Yun family and be dug up? There's only one explanation. There must be a thief in our manor. This thief is extremely vicious and good at hiding. If we don't find her quickly, she can steal my jade hairpin and plot against me today. Tomorrow, she can secretly harm eldest aunt, second sister, and even grandmother. Eldest aunt just said that you know all the servants in the manor like the back of your hand. You're the best person to help Shu solve this case. I beg eldest aunt to help. Otherwise, Shu will be frightened every day and have difficulty sleeping." What? She wanted her to find the person who stole the jade hairpin. That person was personally selected and bribed by her. She stole Ning Shu's jade hairpin to help her and her daughter set up the most important part of this plot. Now, she actually wanted her to find that person and then have that person identify her and her daughter. This girl was simply trying to take her life. Chapter 26. Madame Yang's heart was bitter. But could she shake her head? Ning Shu said it in such a dignified manner. "Today you stole my jade hairpin and plotted against me. Tomorrow you can secretly harm first aunt, second sister, and even grandmother." Even if she said no, then from now on, this big Duke's Fu would no longer tolerate her. Madame Yang looked at the young girl in front of her, who was always warm and gentle like a spring breeze. She only felt like her neck was being strangled by an evil spirit. And this evil spirit was forced out by her. Without waiting for her response, Ning Deyuan had already made a decision. He said with a cold face, "Sister-in-law, if this is the case, please wait for a moment. It won't be too late to go back to your room and rest after this matter is completely settled." Madame Yang could only sit down again and quietly wait for Ning Shu's maids to arrive. Her palms were cold. There weren't many people in Ning Shu's courtyard. Other than Forsythia, there were 8 maids, 4 older women, and Liu Memar, who was in charge of the courtyard. The older women were in charge of the courtyard's cleaning and other rough chores, so they didn't enter her room. The main suspects were the 8 maids and Liu Memar, a total of 9 people. At this time, these 9 people were standing in a row, trembling in fear in front of everyone, receiving everyone's scrutiny. Ning Shu turned her head and looked at Madame Yang with expectation. First aunt, which one of them do you think it is? Madame Yang's entire heart froze. After a long time, she squeezed out a numb word from between her teeth. I only know a little about their simple family matters. As for what they do behind my back, I don't know. Ah, even first aunt can't find out, then what should I do? Ning Shu pursed her lips in distress, and then her face showed an extremely embarrassed expression. She said to everyone, the elders all know that I was once taught by Master Hui Ci. Master was the best at reading people's faces to find out their hearts. To put it bluntly, it was reading people's faces. Although Master only had time to teach me for 3 years before she passed away, fortunately, Shua wasn't too stupid and learned some superficial knowledge. It's just that I haven't used it for a long time, so I'm afraid it's a bit rusty. Let Shua be bold enough to try my little tricks. Seniors, please don't laugh at me. The old lady was amused. She raised her hand and pointed at her. You little clever ghost, you are used to pretending to be humble. Hurry up and go. I want to see who dares to commit a crime under my nose. The last sentence was directed at Madame Yang. Madame Yang's fingernails dug into her palms. She was still thinking that she was lucky. She didn't believe that Ning Shu would be able to find 9 suspect. Yes, grandmother. Ning Shu mischievously accepted the old madam's order and ran to whisper a few words into the old madam's ear. Then, she slowly walked to the center of the hall and examined the 9 people one by one. From their hair to their facial features to their toes, she slowly looked at them. He stared at it for a long time without saying a word. The onlookers looked over curiously, wanting to see how Ning Shu was going to find him. Ning Shu looked at it for a full 15 minutes before she asked. Baiji, did you see anyone sneaking into my room to steal something? Baiji respectfully bowed her head. In reply to Miss, I didn't find anything. Fu Ling, what about you? No. Liu Mema? No. Qing Wei? Ning Shu asked the 9 people one by one. All 9 of them denied it. Their expressions and tone were similar, so it was difficult to find any clues. Then, everyone listened to Ning Shu's next round of questions. Then, did you find anything suspicious? For example, who has more money recently? Also no. No. The second round of questions didn't find anything. Ning Shu followed up with the third and fourth round of questions. They were all simple and meaningless questions. Some of the people who were originally excited became bored. The third branch, Madame Li, yawned and felt that it was a waste of time. This little girl looked smart, but it turned out that she was just pretending. The maidservants who were being interrogated began to relax a little. Right at this time, only to hear Ning Shu suddenly cry out. Baishao, kneel down. Chapter 27. The maidservant named Baishao was startled. She was stunned for a moment and then subconsciously knelt down. Everyone else looked over in surprise. Baishao's face was pale and her whole body was trembling. Eldest miss, shut up. Don't talk nonsense. Ning Shu coldly looked down at her. Let me ask you, if it wasn't you, why is your face so pale, your palms so wet, and your back so sweaty? Baishao seemed to be at a loss for words. After a while, she tearfully said, Please, master, please investigate, it really wasn't me. Her tears flowed down and her whole body was trembling. She almost cried until she fainted. Everyone was suspicious. Baishao was famous for her weak temperament in the manor. Even if she stepped on an ant, she would be scared for a long time. How could it be her? Could eldest miss have made a mistake? Even Hishin felt that it was a bit strange. After searching for so long, it was actually Baishao. Madame Yang and her daughter, who were originally uneasy, looked at each other and the corners of their mouths curled up in ridicule. It seemed that she had set up this formation just to scare people. She wanted to punish them like this. Dream on. Baishao was so scared that she kept kowtowing to Ning Shu, her forehead hitting the ground. Seeing that she was about to hit her head, Ning Shu suddenly reached out and blocked her forehead. I know it wasn't you. Ning Shu said. If she knew it wasn't Baishao, then what was she playing at just now? Madame Li stopped yawning and continued to watch the show. She had just convicted her and declared her innocence. Baishao raised her teary eyes and looked at eldest miss in confusion. Your face is pale because you are very timid. Your palms are wet and your back is sweaty because you already knew who stole the jade hairpin, but you didn't dare to say it. Ning Shu helped Baishao up and spread out her palms, so in your inner struggle, you didn't even know that your palms were bleeding. Ning Shu reached out and gently brushed the dusty hair away from Baishao's forehead. She looked into her eyes and said, "What kind of person can make you so timid and scared that you would risk your life to protect him? Naturally, it's your childhood friend, Green Fennel, isn't it?" The maidservant who was standing at the edge of the room fell to her knees and said loudly, "I'm innocent." "Young miss." Just as Green Fennel was about to defend herself, Ning Shu raised her hand and interrupted her. Ning Shu didn't even look at her. She took a handkerchief and gently wiped the tears on Baishao's face. "I guess you must have seen First Aunt talking to Green Fennel a few days ago in the corner of the garden or in a hidden place behind the rockery. You were confused at that time but didn't think too much about it. It's just that when I was investigating this case today, you suddenly reacted. But you thought of Qinghui as your best friend, you were afraid that you would harm her by telling her the truth. Therefore, even though you were falsely accused just now, you still clenched your teeth and covered up for her. But what about her? Not only did she not defend you, but she also tried her best to clear her name. My good Baishao, do you know that some people's friendship is just superficial? It's not worthy of your disgusting treatment." Baishao's heart sank and the tears that she had just stopped fell again. She sobbed, "That's right. Young miss, blame me for being too stupid and not being able to see through people." At that moment, Madame Yang's hands couldn't help trembling and she fiercely clenched them. Baishao had confessed, but Green Fennel was still shaking her head and denying in a hoarse voice, "No. It's not like that. That day, I just happened to meet First Madam and paid my respects to her. Then, we chatted for a while. Young miss, I'm really innocent." Ning Shu smiled. "Are you still complaining? I have to say that you hid it very well. When I asked you before, you didn't show any flaws at all. The person who bought you is really good at picking people. It's a pity that you didn't persist to the end. When I pointed out Baishao's name, I was just a little suspicious. But you were so happy that it was hard not to notice." Beside her, Forsythia immediately said in a clear voice, "Before the interrogation, young miss secretly asked me to do one thing. That is, after she randomly pointed out someone, I was to carefully observe the expressions of the others. Young miss asked a few meaningless questions just now to make all of you relax. Then, she suddenly pointed out Baishao's name. When the others heard it, they were naturally surprised. However, there was one person who was different, and that was the real culprit. After being surprised, she burst into joy and then felt relieved. She thought that there was a scapegoat for this matter and that she would not be found out again. This reaction was completely instinctive and difficult to hide no matter how much she tried to restrain herself. So, I found out immediately. Of course, this couldn't escape old Madam's eyes. Ning Shu had run to old Madam's side and whispered to her to pay attention to this matter. Old Madam, who was sitting at the head of the table, nodded solemnly and stamped the matter. Green Fennel, who had just imitated Baishao and cried out miserably, suddenly collapsed with an ashen face. Seeing that she was going to die today, she raised her head miserably and looked at someone with a pleading gaze. And that person was Madame Yang. Old Madam, Ning De Yuan, and the others were also looking at Madame Yang, including her own husband, Ning De Huai. Chapter 28. Madame Yang suddenly stood up. Her whole body was trembling as she cursed, "You lowly servant, you did something wrong, and you still want to falsely accuse me. Old lady, how can you believe such a thing that even dares to murder her own master? Husband, you have to believe me. It really has nothing to do with me. If she accuses me, let her show evidence if she has the ability." She didn't expect that she would turn hostile. Qing Wei crawled to Madame Yang and said, "Madame Yang, it was you who found out that I had an affair with Baiju, who was by the eldest master's side, and used this to bewitch me. You also promised that if I stole a personal item of the eldest miss and gave it to you, you would find a way to transfer me to your side and fulfill me and Brother Ju. Nonsense. That day, it was you who took the initiative to come to me. I didn't pay attention to you, so where is the promise? You are talking nonsense, but do you have evidence? If you don't have evidence, then shut up. Otherwise, I will take your life. A dignified madam of the first branch of the Duke's mansion actually quarreled with a servant like a shrew. It was simply unbearable. Ning Dehuai lost his face. He angrily pointed 3 times, turned around, and left. Father. Husband. Madame Yang and Ning Wn shouted miserably, but they couldn't call him back. After seeing enough of this rotten matter, the old lady heavily snorted, Madame Yang, you shut up. Now the matter is clear. My Ning family is really unfortunate to have such a scum like you. Today, I will make this decision. From now on, you will kneel in the ancestral hall for 49 days and copy the ancestral teachings 100 times to cleanse your impure heart. Ning Wan didn't learn well from such a mother. She will also be punished to kneel in the temple for 3 days and 3 nights. If you do it again in the future, there will be no mercy. A huge storm started from the first branch and also ended from the first branch. Madame Yang fell down and collapsed on the chair. Like a puppet, she was dragged into the ancestral hall by the servants. Ning Wn wept and knelt in the temple hall, like a weak willow that had gone through frost, miserable and weak. In the empty temple hall, other than the cold golden statue of Buddha, there was only Ning Wn crying on the ground. In front of her, sandalwood scattered on the ground. The door of the temple hall suddenly opened. Ning Wan turned around and was immediately enraged. What are you doing here? Are you here to laugh at me? I'm telling you, that's impossible. Don't think that just because you beat me this time, you can suppress me forever. I, Ning Wan, will definitely step on you in this lifetime. Ignoring her taunts and curses, Ning Shu stepped into the hall and took out 3 incense sticks from the small handful on the table. Holding them in her hand, she knelt on the futon next to Ning Wan and kowtowed 3 times to Buddha devoutly. Then she got up and put the incense sticks into the incense burner. After she was done, she turned to look at Ning Wan on the ground. The rising smoke was gently blown away by the wind outside the window. Together with the light that jumped in through the window lattice, Ning Shu's body was hazy. Ning Shu said indifferently, "It turns out that in my heart, the family is one, just like a towering tree, and we are all the branches and leaves of this tree. Even if there are disagreements within the family, it is an internal matter. In the face of external difficulties, everyone still needs to work together. Only in this way can the family prosper and flourish together. But today, I suddenly learned a lesson from second sister. And that is, sometimes, it's not necessarily a good thing to have too many branches and leaves. If a branch or leaf still pops out and wants to steal other people's sunlight and nutrients, or if a branch or leaf has long rotted away and wants to rot into the roots, it's better to cut it off and cut it off with a snap. Second sister, I hope you will remember this." She stayed by Ning Wan's side for a moment, then continued to step out of the temple hall. When the door was closed with a creak, Ning Wan's eyes trembled. She gasped and fell down. Chapter 29. Second Miss is sick. She said that she suddenly fainted and couldn't wake up from nightmares. She kept spitting out nonsense and couldn't be fed soup. It seemed that she was very sick. Old Madam went to see her and it didn't seem to be fake. She ordered people to send her back to her courtyard to recuperate. When Ning Shu was accompanying Jia to paint, she heard the news. Really? She picked up the brush and continued to paint her painting, then let her recuperate. Remember to send some tonics for me later. I won't go in person, lest she sees me and becomes more sick. That won't be good. Forsythia took the order and went to do it. Ning Shu continued to paint the goose yellow and dyed 2 yellow balls on the painting. The balls dotted 2 small black beans and then smiled with satisfaction. It's done. Jia stared at the painting with a strange expression. His little face wrinkled like a dumpling. Sister, what are you painting? Ning Shu pointed to the green lines, red dots, and yellow balls. she said with a natural expression, two orioles singing in the green willow. Look, this green willow is graceful, and the pink peach blossoms in the distance are full of spring. There are also these two orioles. Look, this little plump one is you, and the slightly bigger and thinner one is me. Who was 5 years old, just started to learn painting. Looking at his sister's vivid painting, he fell into deep confusion. He couldn't help but say, "You're so good at teasing your brother. My good your sister is playing with you. We won't be fooled. Come, the teacher's painting album is here. Mother will study it with you carefully." Ning Shu couldn't help rubbing the tip of her nose embarrassedly. Although she didn't think she was talented, she was good at music, chess, poetry, wine, and tea. Only the painting in the middle was missing. TSK, medicine and stone spirit. She didn't want to expose the truth, so as not to ruin her glorious image in Jia's heart. Ning Shu found an excuse and left. The peach blossoms in the garden were in full bloom. A cool breeze blew, falling on her clothes and hair like rain. Ning Shu sat on the swing under the peach tree and stretched lazily, leisurely and carefree. "What time is it?" Ning Shu asked. Forsythia finished her work and came back, replying to "Miss, it's time." Ning Shu reluctantly got up and brushed off the petals on her body. After dealing with the first branch's matter yesterday, he had been lazy for most of the day. Today, it was time to get down to business. Xiahou Qing had fulfilled his part of the promise, so she had no reason to go back on her words. Moreover, by promising to help Xiahou Qing investigate the plum blossom kiss, she was also helping herself. If what she saw that night was right, Qi Huaijin, who was buried in the Qi family's ancestral grave, had also died from this poison. What? In the residence of Yun, when eldest Madame Yun heard the servant's report, she doubted her ears. The steward hurriedly said, replying to Madame, the eldest miss of the Ning family, is outside the residence asking for an audience. Madame Yun was originally a fierce daughter of a military family. She slapped the table and knocked over the teacup. She harmed my Faya to this extent, and she still has the face to see me. How dare she? The steward immediately replied, Madam, this servant will drive her away right now. No, you let her in. Madame Yun stood up and sneered, there's a path to heaven, but you don't want to take it. There's no door to hell, but you insist on coming. I'd like to see what kind of disaster she wants to cause under my watch. After a while, Ning Shu and Forsythia calmly walked into the Yun family's main hall. Not long ago, she and Cloud Leaf went through the wedding ceremony here, and it was also here that she was ruthlessly slapped by Madame Yun. At this moment, seeing Ning Shu, Madame Yun's palm itched again. She glared angrily, and without even asking the servant to see the tea, she said directly, Ning Shu, you cursed my son and now he's still unconscious on the sickbed. Are you here today to apologize? Ning Shu was not angry at her rudeness. She only bowed gracefully and said softly, I'm here to help Madam and young Master Yun. Madame Yun laughed angrily as if she had heard the funniest joke in the world. I should be thankful that you didn't harm my son, and now you want to help us? That's the biggest joke in the world. Ning Shu shook her head slowly and said with slight regret, doesn't Madam want to find the person who plotted against young Master Yun behind the scenes? Or do you wish to see young Master Yun die in his prime with your own eyes? You. Chapter 30. Madame Yun wanted to continue cursing, but was interrupted by Ning Shu. Madam should already know about what happened yesterday. The case was solved by Lord Wei, which proves that the curse was not placed by me. As for who is the culprit, I will wait for Lord Wei's final judgment. You don't believe what I said, but you should believe Lord Wei's words. Moreover, I just offered to help you, which is actually beneficial to both of us. If the culprit can be found, then young Master Yun's disaster can be solved and his life can be saved. Me, because of these things that happened one after another around me, the whole capital is laughing at my Ning family and scolding me, Ning Shu. If the case can be solved smoothly, I can also get rid of the infamy and can raise my head in the capital in the future. Madame Yun glanced at her contemptuously and turned around to order people to drive her away. The Jingji government hasn't found any clues until now. Why should I believe you? Ning Shu sighed softly. Her regret deepened. Because the Jingji government can't find out. She suddenly stopped speaking halfway. When she walked to Madame Yun's side and was only a foot away from her, making sure that only the two of them could hear her, she said in a low voice, even if they can find out, they won't be able to find out the truth. Her voice was soft and gentle, like the clouds in the sky, with the unique sweetness of a young girl, but what she said made Madame Yun's complexion change immediately. If what I found is true, young Master Yun has a 4-petal-like red spot on the side of his neck. After hearing that Imperial Dr. Shu discovered it, he immediately went to the palace to report it to His Majesty. His Majesty ordered the Jingji government and the Supreme Court to jointly investigate this case, but no one is allowed to reveal half of it. Imperial Dr. Shu was even more tight-lipped and avoided talking about young Master Yun's condition. Madame Yun wondered how I learned about it. This little girl doesn't want to hide it. Yes, I have sent spies around your house. You are so bold. This little girl has no choice. Ning Shu showed full sincerity. If Madame Yun is still unwilling to believe me at this moment, I have to share my last secret with you to show my sincerity. Madame Yun stared at her suspiciously, her eyes filled with distrust. What secret? Ning Shu slowly walked to the small table next to Madame Yun. Reaching out with her slender white fingertips, she dipped her finger into the teacup that Madame Yun had smashed earlier. Then, she wrote a few words on the small table stroke by stroke. The young girl's fingertips were soft, and the tea was transparent. It was only 7 words, and the wind blew it dry, leaving no trace behind. However, this caused Madame Yun's heart to tremble and she almost lost her composure. She took 3 steps back to put some distance between herself and Ning Shu. I don't believe it, she shouted. She said she didn't believe it, but she already believed it, because she had already waved her sleeve and chased all the servants out. Because the words Ning Shu had written just now were, Chi-san also died from this disease. It was as if Madame Yun had peeked at a frightening heavenly secret from the 9th heaven. She collapsed onto the chair, unable to make a sound as she gasped for breath. A few months ago, the news of 3rd young Master Chi's sudden death was known to everyone in the capital city. But who had ever heard that there was such a secret behind his death? What did this mean? It meant that her son would follow in the same footsteps as Chi-san, who had been sitting and waiting for death. Chi-san's cause of death was covered up by the hand of the heavens, and now, her son would also have the same fate. Heavens! Heavens! Cloud Leaf was her only flesh and blood in this life. Just as Madame Yun's heart was filled with grief and indignation, and she had no one to rely on, she heard the slender young girl in front of her speak again. You can think about it now. Are the officials personally sent by the emperor all around your residence to protect the Yun residents, or do they have other intentions? After you have thought it through, you can consider my daughter's suggestion. Madam, please give me 15 days. Madame Yun used all her strength to grab onto her clothes, as if she was grabbing onto her last life-saving straw. Her voice was dry and hoarse as she said, if you can't find the culprit who harmed my son within 15 days, what will you do? Ning Shu solemnly said, I will personally write 1,000 words of self-reproach and paste it in front of the Yun residence's door. I will also kneel for a day and a night to apologize to you. When she heard that Chi Huijin had died from this disease, Madame Yun's heart had already been shaken. When she heard Ning Shu's promise, her thoughts changed and she immediately gritted her teeth and said, all right. Then I will give you a chance. Not for anything else, but because she had no other choice. Chapter 31. By the time she left the Yun residence, it was already past 5 in the afternoon. Ning Shu let out a long sigh. Just now, she had coaxed and lied, mixing in 50% truth and 40% falsehood, adding a spoonful of false feelings. Then, she had mixed the truth and falsehood evenly and poured it all into Madame Yun's mind. Finally, she had coaxed her into opening her golden mouth and allowing her to enter the residence to investigate the case. It really took away half of her life. Especially when she had to be on guard against Madame Yun's iron palm. It was not easy at all. After she let out that long sigh, she boarded the carriage with the help of Forsythia. She immediately said to the coachman, Zi Gui, let's go to the southern pacifying prince's residence first. Forsythia blinked, Are we going to find His Highness the Crown Prince to discuss the case? Ning Shu shook her head. There's no rush. Let's first find him to get some money in advance. She had just made a vow and even made a promise to kneel down and beg for forgiveness. Shouldn't she let him bleed a little first to appease her unbalanced heart? I want to eat the Chasing Cloud and Chasing Moon restaurant. After half an hour, Ning Shu sat in front of Xiahou Qing and said firmly, "Why?" Xiahou Qing stood in the corridor and pinched a few pieces of bird food between his fingers. He quietly waited for the birds on the shelf to jump down and peck away until they were full. Ning Shu said very straightforwardly, "Because it's the most expensive, because it's the most delicious, because it's the most difficult to eat, and also because my heart is extremely tired. For reasons, Your Highness the Crown Prince can choose any one of them." Xiahou Qing did not even turn his head. He spread out his palm and let the bold bird peck at his palm. "I seem to have heard someone say yesterday in front of the Duke's residence that the Duke's residence has deep ancestral roots and should not be lacking in money." How could she hear that he was using her bold words yesterday to mock her? However, Ning Shu had her own reasons. "I am not lacking in money, but it's different." "How is it different?" Ning Shu said matter-of-factly, "Although all the money in this world looks the same, there is a difference. His own money was different from other people's money. If he could spend other people's money, why would he not spend his own money? Besides, I'm investigating this case not only for myself, but also for Your Highness. It's not too much to ask you to treat me to a meal." Hui Mo, who had been listening, lowered his head and pondered. He couldn't help but nod. He felt that what she said made sense. Xiahou Qing sneered. He was not in a hurry to pay attention to her. He waited for the 4 or 5 birds on the shelf to peck at the food. After a long time, he scattered the rest of the bird food in his hand. "Let's go." The most profitable place in the capital was not some brothel or gambling house, but the Chasing Cloud and Moon Chasing Pavilion. It was owned by the emperor's youngest brother, Prince Ku Xiao Minglan. There was no need to talk about the extravagance and liveliness. There were 2 wonderful things about the restaurant. One was the storyteller inside, nicknamed the all-knowing man in Jianghu. He had a glib tongue and knew all the latest and most interesting things in the capital. There was nothing he didn't know, and there was nothing he didn't dare to talk about. The second was the delicacies in the restaurant. Everyone thought that the most delicious food in the world should be in the imperial palace. In fact, it was a big mistake. Although the chefs of the royal kitchen had exquisite culinary skills and could be called the best in the world, there were many rules in the palace. Every delicacy that was carefully cooked and brought out while still hot from the royal kitchen had to go through multiple inspections and layers of testing for poison. Therefore, no matter how delicious the food was, the heat would have dissipated by the time it was served. How could it be compared to the Chasing Cloud and Moon Chasing Pavilion? The taste was not worse than the one in the imperial palace. Therefore, the people in the capital all flocked to it. Needless to say, the price was high. Some people queued for 3 months and still might not be able to eat it. Now, Ning Shu could sit in the private room on the 2nd floor of the Chasing Cloud and Moon Chasing Pavilion and taste the delicacies in front of her. It was all thanks to His Highness's extraordinary face. Take the 4 Seas dragon soup in front of her as an example. The ingredients used were top-notch japonica rice and dried seafood. It was simmered for 8 hours on low heat to extract the freshness and blend it into the rice. After the japonica rice had completely melted, she took the fresh shrimp and crab that had just been fished out from the water in the morning. Only the shrimp tail and crab roe meat were added to the soup. At the same time, she took a pot of shrimp head and fried it until it was yellow and glistening with oil. Finally, she sprinkled it with a handful of green onions and took it out of the pot. The taste was so fresh that it could make one's tongue fall off. Ning Shu savored the soup while looking at the opposite side. There were more than 10 dishes on the table. After consulting with Xiahou Qing, Hui Mo only chose 3 or 4 dishes and placed them on a small plate to Xiahou Qing's right. Xiahou Qing picked up the bowl and chopsticks and casually ate a few mouthfuls before he stopped moving. His body leaned against the carved armrest and quietly rubbed the small piece of human bone in his palm. The evening haze reflected on the side of his face through the carved window lattice. It was obviously orange-purple, But there was no warmth in it at all. It seemed especially cold, and also especially, if the young girls downstairs saw this, they would probably scream until their throats were broken. Fortunately, the most important guests of the Chasing Cloud and Moon Chasing Pavilion did not enter from the main hall on the first floor. Instead, they entered from the side door through a special secret staircase that led directly to the private room on the second floor. As long as they sat in the private room, they would be able to see the bustling scene downstairs. For example, in the main hall, everyone was listening to the storytelling with great interest. If you want to ask about the most popular person in the capital, you can't not mention Ning Shu, the pearl of Duke Ning's family. Yesterday, there was a big commotion in front of the Duke's residence. It was really wonderful. Chapter 32. After the ceremony, young Master Yun vomited blood and fainted. He did not get better these few days. Instead, his condition worsened. Even the imperial physicians could not cure him. Imperial Censor Yun and his wife were about to cry their eyes out. Suddenly, a servant dug out a pouch in the courtyard. There was a jade hairpin and a charm in the pouch. Guess who had it? Bai Xiaosheng slapped the wooden board. It was Lady Ning. A spectator immediately said, she wanted to harm her own husband. There is such a vicious woman in this world. Everyone around him was suspicious. Could it be that her previous husbands all died at her hands? No, wait for me to explain in detail. Bai Xiaosheng shook his head and continued. Imperial Censor Yun immediately took the pouch to the emperor. The emperor personally ordered the Jingji government to arrest her immediately. Thus, they came to the entrance of the Duke's public house. They saw tens of thousands of officials surrounding the Duke's public house. Ning Shu wanted to escape in a hurry. Halfway through the dog hole, Lord Wei came down from the sky and caught her. On the second floor, Ning Shu heard the word dog hole. The chopsticks that were about to reach her lips paused and almost hit her teeth. Hui Mo, who was beside her, laughed and was secretly pinched by Forsythia. When she looked at him again, she found that Heir Xiaoho, who had always been as cold as ice, seemed to have a slight smile on his lips at this moment. TSK. Fortunately, Ning Shu was always open-minded. She did not mind and continued to enjoy her meal. Then, she heard the noise coming from downstairs. Ning Shu cried and cried. Naturally, she refused to admit it. Lord Wei analyzed carefully and found a loophole. He angrily asked her what happened if she did not poison him when she left the public house secretly 3 days ago. Ning Shu was speechless. Then, she saw His Highness the Sixth Prince leading the army over and protecting Ning Shu behind him. He was going to fight for Ning Shu. When a bloody battle was about to break out, a carriage came from afar. Who do you think it is? Bai Xiaosheng had just finished when someone became impatient. Who is it? Bai Xiaosheng rolled his eyes. It is the Prince of Nanping, Xiaoho Qing, who just came to the capital not long ago. He. They heard that Xiaoho Shizi soared out of the carriage and said in loud and clear voice, 3 days ago, Lady Ning was with me, until daybreak. Everyone was shocked. What? His Highness the Crown Prince had just entered the capital. How could he be together with Ning Shu? That's heir of Xiaoho. The young girls at the banquet tugged at their skirts, and one of them couldn't help but say, this is impossible. His Highness will never take a fancy to her. Lord Wei then asked, why is your Highness with her? Xiaoho Shizi leisurely told me that 3 days ago, when he went to the tomb of the third young master of the Qi family, he happened to see that Lady Ning wanted to commit suicide in front of the third young master of the Qi family. In the end, Bai Xiaosheng sighed softly. So your Highness couldn't bear it and decided to lend a helping hand. The young girls who were worried a moment ago were all relieved. Another person asked, then what is the explanation for the case of the talisman in the pouch? Until now, it seems that the culprit who buried the talisman has not been caught. Bai Xiaosheng took out a fan and opened it with a swoosh, covering half of his mouth. He pretended to whisper to the guests, that's a mystery. I only heard one thing, the first wife of the Duke's mansion recently moved to the ancestral hall to recite scriptures. You can speculate on the mystery, it's not just me talking nonsense. The guests pondered carefully and smacked their lips. I see. People say that noble families are good, but they don't know how troublesome they are. It's not as good as us ordinary families. A middle-aged man in the corner chimed in. This Lady Ning is really a strange person. First, there was the fearless Cloud Leaf, then there was the sixth prince who didn't fear public anger to protect her. Now, even Xiahou Shizi, who just returned to the capital, is involved with her. What kind of charm does she have? Oh right, there's also the dead third young master of the Qi family. She just got divorced from young Master Yun and then went to the tomb of the third young master of the Qi family to commit suicide. Among these people, who do you think she fell in love with? Chapter 33. Bai Xiaosheng smiled again. Everyone may not know, but that Ning Shu is the reincarnation of the heavenly fox star. This star is the most affectionate, loving everyone she sees. Just like today, she willingly came to the residence of Yun and begged Madame Yun to give her a chance to take care of the unconscious Cloud Leaf. She even shouted that if he doesn't wake up, she will be buried with him. She kowtowed 10 times before Madame Yun was moved and finally agreed. Everyone was stunned by this shocking Lady Ning. Isn't she a fickle woman? No matter how magnanimous Ning Shu was, her face darkened when she was inexplicably labeled as a fickle woman. To hell with the reincarnation of the celestial fox star, they were praising her too much. Someone else smacked their lips. If she really willingly takes care of young Master Yun, she's not a bad woman. The young girl who had just said that Xia Hu Qing would never fall for Ning Shu jumped up and said in disgust, "Disgusting." Then she left with her servants. On the second floor, Xiahou Qing asked faintly, "Who is it?" Ning Shu shook her head with a sigh without looking. Third young master Qi's sister, Qi Zhuanyu. Xiahou Qing supported his chin with his hand, a faint smile on his face. So, the reason you found for yourself is to go to the residence of Yun tomorrow to take care of Cloud Leaf? Xiahou Qing's pale chin peeked out from under the fox fur coat. He mocked, talented. Ning Shu could not help but blush. Thinking about how she would have to go to the residence of Yun for the next 15 days, she lamented. However, who could give her a better idea? Qi Zhuanyu's departure did not interrupt the bustle downstairs. Bai Xiaosheng paused for a while and turned the topic back to Cloud Leaf. Young Master Yun's strange illness is also strange. Since that day he vomited blood, he has been in a coma. When he wakes up occasionally, his whole body is numb and he can't even move a finger. He's like a wooden puppet, as if his soul has been taken. Taken? Yes. According to the servants of the residence of Yun, young Master Yun's courtyard has been haunted by red ghostly shadows. They suddenly appear in the middle of the night and disappear in the blink of an eye. It really makes people think of female ghosts chasing after souls, just like the unsolved case from 3 years ago. The following words became more and more suspenseful. The sky was not dark yet, but it made people's hair stand on end for no reason. Forsythia whispered timidly, "Miss, are there really ghosts in this world?" "Of course." "Ah." Forsythia's expression changed. Ning Shu finished her meal, and then picked up the sparrow tongue that had been delivered to her, but after the death of an ordinary person, their soul would only linger in the mortal realm for 7 days at most. After that, they would be sucked into the netherworld and set foot on the road to the Yellow Springs. During these 7 days, the ghost would only wander around aimlessly, unable to harm anyone. Even those who had committed all kinds of evil in their lives would be immediately taken away by the black and white impermanence after death and directly thrown into the 18 levels of hell. If ghosts could really harm people, how many unsolved cases would happen every day? Living people like us don't have to live anymore. How did Lady Ning know? Huemore, who was beside her, interrupted curiously. Ning Shu tapped the tip of her nose lightly. "Just take it as a guess." She was probably the only person in the world who had the experience of touring the netherworld for 7 lifetimes. Xiahou Qing kept the bone in his palm and slowly got up. He moved to the front of the carved window, with his back facing the bustling crowd downstairs. "You insisted on coming here today just to let me hear this." "Yes." Ning Shu stopped joking when it came to serious matters, and immediately said seriously, "Today, after I received Madame Yun's approval, I used the excuse of taking care of young Master Yun to find out more information. Then, I heard this strange incident, and it was even more bizarre than what Bai Xiaoxing said. According to young Master Yun's personal servant, Chu He, actually, young Master Yun had symptoms before he married me. He often felt dizzy and weak. Then, a red ghostly shadow appeared in his courtyard. Chapter 34. Ning Shu said slowly. At first, no one took it to heart, thinking that it was just a moment of blur. Cloudleaf's dizziness was also treated by a doctor, who said that it was due to being busy recently. He left after prescribing a sedative. But no one expected that the frequency of the ghostly figures would increase, and Cloudleaf's symptoms would become more obvious, until the day she suddenly vomited blood in the wedding hall. That night, a pool of blood suddenly appeared beside Cloudleaf's pillow. 2 days later, the manservant Chu He saw the red-clothed female ghost walk into young Master Yun's courtyard. He was so scared that he fainted. When he woke up, the female ghost was already gone, and there was another pool of blood in Cloudleaf's room. The blood actually condensed into a word, danger. Forsythia's heart still skipped a beat when she heard that frightening situation for the second time. It was also because of this that Madame Yun was so furious when she dug out her young Mrs. Jade hairpin. She firmly believed that the female ghost was attracted by the amulet wrapped around the hairpin. Ning Shu continued speaking in a low and gentle voice. Putting aside whether the female ghost's bloodletter is true or not, I have a doubt in my heart. There are so many suspicious points about Cloudleaf's illness that have not been spread, but this one was spread to the Chasing Cloud and Moon Tower. I believe that it will soon spread throughout the capital from here. I don't believe in ghosts and gods, so. Outside the tower, the sun had already set, and the lanterns had just been lit. The warm orange light leaped into her eyes, like stars and the moon. I suspect that someone is trying to cover up the truth about Cloudleaf's poisoning, using the story of the female ghost to divert attention. The noise behind him was noisy, but in contrast, the girl's voice in front of him was low and gentle. It tickled his ears. Xiahou Qing frowned. He paused for a moment, then raised his hand and gently knocked on the window frame. There is a second possibility, which is the exact opposite of your guess. He put forward his own point of view. After His Majesty heard about young Master Yun's murder, he sent the Supreme Court and the Jingji government to investigate. The relevant details must not be leaked. Only the word haunted is harmless and will not cause fear, so it can be spread. Ning Shu lowered her eyes and thought for a moment. She quickly understood what he meant. I understand. What you're trying to say is that someone was afraid that the Cloudleaf incident wouldn't be noticed, so they purposely spread the female ghost story to attract attention and attract people to investigate further. This is another way of thinking, and it makes a lot of sense. She raised her head and said solemnly, but no matter what, the Cloudleaf case is more complicated than I thought. So? Xiahou Qing guessed that she had something to say next. Ning Shu's eyes lit up. She immediately put on a smile and looked at Xiahou Qing. Her eyes were full of eagerness. I would like to ask Your Highness to temporarily lend me this highly skilled and quick-witted brother Hui Mo. She still remembered that Huemo's autopsy speed and skill that night were both excellent. She was afraid that she couldn't find a better one in the entire capital. As for those who were proficient in autopsy, their medical skills would not be bad. The capital that she wanted in advance was exactly this. As soon as she finished speaking, Xiahou Qing showed a look of understanding. After such a big circle, she finally revealed her true intention. She even schemed against the people around him. He was wrong before. This woman's heart was full of twists and turns, not 3,000, but 30,000. Ignoring her, he waved his hand and asked Huemo to help him put on his cloak. Then he lifted his leg and left. Although it's my duty to solve this case, the poison is also closely related to Your Highness. Helping me is equivalent to helping yourself. With Brother Huemo's help, I believe that the time to solve the mystery will be greatly reduced. And with Brother Huemo's supervision, seeing Brother Huemo is like seeing Your Highness. I will do my best to live up to Your Highness's trust. Ning Shu hurried to catch up with him and used her flowery words to the extreme. But his pace was very fast. In the blink of an eye, He had already boarded the carriage from the threshold of the VIP passage. Ning Shu sighed in her heart. Just as the carriage was about to move, she heard the person in the carriage say, "Let's go. Within 3 days, Huemore will appear in front of you." The carriage drove away leisurely, taking the people in the carriage with it into the waning lights. At the end of the night, Ning Shu's lips, which had just drooped, quietly lifted, revealing a sly smile. The slightly cool night wind blew the various colored lanterns on the street. After leaving the Chasing Cloud and Moon Chasing restaurant, Forsythia carefully put a watercolored cloak on Ning Shu. The color was actually very specific, but Ning Shu's skin was very white. It was like a soft red seeping out of the snow jade. Under the contrast of the watercolored cloak, it looked particularly fresh. "Miss, are we still going to the residence of Yoon tonight?" Ning Shu nodded and smiled sweetly. "Of course I'm going." It took her so much effort to find the opportunity to investigate the case in the residence of Yoon. Moreover, she only had 15 days. How could she waste it? Seeing was believing. She wanted to see whether the person hiding in the residence of Yoon was a human or a ghost. Chapter 35. The treatment of the savior and the perpetrator was naturally different. Because they had reached an agreement, Madame Yoon's attitude towards her was much better. For the time being, she would not use her ultimate move, the iron palm, again. She even specially sent someone to welcome her at the main entrance of the Yoon residence. It was just that the person who came to greet her really made Ning Shu feel flattered, because this person was her biggest rival in the entire capital, Chi Juanyu, who had just heard her name in the Chasing Clouds and Chasing Moon pavilion and had spurned her with disgust. Ever since Chi Huijin was engaged to her, he died of a serious illness in less than a month. Chi Juanyu saw her as a thorn in her flesh. No matter where she went, Chi Juanyu would give her tit for tat. For example, at this moment, a pair of eyes were fiercely glaring at her, as if an arrow could shoot out from her eyes and pierce through her heart. "You actually have the face to come here." Ning Shu glanced at her and found that she was wearing the same clothes as when she was at the residence of Yoon. She was afraid that once she heard that she was coming to the residence of Yoon, she would rush to the residence of Yoon to stop her. However, Chi Juanyu's mother and Madame Yoon were sisters. Madame Yoon was her aunt and Cloud Leaf was her cousin. As long as she came to the residence of Yoon, she would not be able to avoid this. Letting out a sigh in her heart, Ning Shu raised her smiling face and asked doubtfully, "Why, is the residence of Yoon some kind of gate to hell? Isn't Miss Juanyu also here? Then what's wrong with me visiting the residence of Yoon?" Chi Juanyu pointed at her hatefully and began to talk like a knife. "You poisonous woman, you haven't forgotten, have you? You killed my elder brother a few months ago. Now you want to continue to harm my second cousin. Your intentions are simply terrible." Ning Shu was not angry at all and shrugged. "If Miss Juanyu thinks that I killed your elder brother, you can take the evidence to the Ministry of Justice or the Supreme Court to sue me and ask them to come and investigate. I will wait patiently for the trial." Chi Juanyu sneered, thinking that she was simply ridiculous. "Evidence? Who in the entire capital doesn't know that you, Ning Shu, are destined to be a jinx? What proof do you need?" Ning Shu faintly glanced at her and said, "So it turns out that when His Majesty governs my great Yu, he doesn't rely on the law to determine the criminal law, but on the rumors in the marketplace. I've learned something today." "You." Chi Zhanyu was caught off guard and choked. If she dared to say yes, it would be a great disrespect to His Majesty. If she said no, then she wouldn't be able to find trouble with Ning Shu today. This made her so angry that her face turned red. Chi Zhanyu gritted his teeth as he spoke. "Do you think that just because you have the power of the House of High Duke, the Lu Bo's household will be afraid of you? Let me tell you, today I will avenge my elder brother." After saying that, she raised her hand and sent a slap towards Ning Shu. Ning Shu's eyes swept and slightly leaned to the side to avoid the slap. Then, she took the opportunity to grab Chi Zhanyu's wrist in her palm. When she was slapped by Madame Yoon, it wasn't that she couldn't avoid it, but that she tolerated a grieving mother. It didn't mean that anyone could reach their hand to her face. Ning Shu's smile faded. She looked at Chi Zhanyu's distorted face and said, "Are you jealous of me? Qi Zhanyu tried hard to pull her hand back but failed several times. Her face was extremely ugly. I'm jealous of you. Jealous of what? Ning Shu said matter-of-factly, jealous of my beauty. Qi Zhanyu's eyes trembled. What? Ning Shu suddenly realized, then you're jealous that I'm smarter than you. Qi Zhanyu's face turned green and she burst out with vulgarities. Nonsense. Ning Shu finally magnanimously released her wrist and said with a smile, since you're not jealous, then why do you keep pestering me? If Miss Zhanyu doesn't have any other advice, then I'll go in first. After saying that, Ning Shu smiled and bowed to Qi Zhanyu. Then, she lifted her left foot and stepped through the door of the residence of Yun with forsythia. Qi Zhanyu's flustered and exasperated voice came from behind, Ning Shu, I curse you. I curse you to be alone for the rest of your life, to be trampled by all the men in the world, to be unmarried, and to die a horrible death. The experience of dying a horrible death was too strong. Ning Shu was unmoved and continued to step forward with her right leg. However, Qi Zhanyu's next sentence was even more vicious. I curse your whole family to die a horrible death. Die without a complete corpse. The smile in Ning Shu's eyes completely disappeared. She turned around and slapped Qi Zhanyu hard on the face. Chapter 36. At the same time as the slap was delivered, Ning Shu exclaimed, Ah, ghost shadow. Qi Zhanyu was distracted for a moment and did not dodge. The other servants who were watching were also shocked by the ghost shadow, and no one reacted to stop Ning Shu. When Ning Shu took her hand away, Qi Zhanyu's face was red and burning. She was stunned for a moment and was about to withdraw her hand when she heard Ning Shu's apologetic and panicked expression. Miss Zhanyu, I'm really sorry. I just suddenly caught a glimpse of a red shadow floating on your face. I was afraid that the female ghost in the mansion was going to possess your body, so I had to hit you in a hurry. I presume Miss Zhanyu won't bear a grudge against me? Ning Shu looked at her carefully, as if she was sure that there was no shadow of the female ghost around her. Only then did she feel completely relieved. She patted her chest and said, Look, that ghost has left. That's great. Her actions were perfect and reasonable, all for the sake of Qi Zhanyu. It was impeccable. Qi Zhanyu covered her face and pointed at her with all her strength. She could not say a word and almost fainted. Ning Shu took the handkerchief handed over by forsythia and carefully wiped the hand that had just slapped Qi Zhanyu. Previously, she had been thinking about Qi Huaijin's sudden death and it was reasonable for Qi Zhanyu to vent her anger on her. Every time Qi Zhanyu provoked her, she tried to avoid and did not argue with her. But Qi Zhanyu should not have touched her family. If she tolerated it, then what was the meaning of this rebirth? After wiping her hand, Ning Shu folded the handkerchief and said to Qi Zhanyu lightly, If Miss Zhanyu is okay, I'm really going in this time. Qi Zhanyu covered her face and roared, Stop. Ning Shu stood still and looked at her with a smile, looking forward to what she would do next. Qi Zhanyu couldn't hold it in any longer. She clenched her fists tightly and asked with difficulty, What is your relationship with Xiahou Shizi? Ning Shu simply didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Today, she had mustered so many people to look for trouble. On the surface, it was to complain about injustice for her brother and second cousin, but in fact, the crux of the matter was here. It really made her speechless. Just because of a moment of jealousy, she wanted to curse someone else's entire family. If he didn't teach her a lesson, it wouldn't be right. Ning Shu's eyes flashed with a sly light. She spread out her hands and said in a casual tone, What can it be? It's just because of that night. Hearing these words, Qi Chuyu's face, which had turned red from hatred, immediately froze. What do you mean? Who in the capital did not know that Qi Zhanyu had one extreme joy and one extreme hatred? What she hated the most was Ning Shu. She hated Ning Shu for causing the death of her most respected and beloved brother. What she was most happy about was the Crown Prince of Nanping. Qi Zhanyu had admired the Crown Prince since she was young. She had said that she would only marry the Crown Prince in this life. She had even made a big joke of two women fighting for the same husband with the 13th princess. She had become the laughingstock of the entire capital, but she still did not repent. At this time, when she suddenly heard Ningshu's words, she was stunned. What nonsense are you talking about? This is impossible. How could the crown prince like someone with a ruined reputation like you? Just based on your status of being married 3 times, he will never marry you in this life. Ningshu's face revealed a sad and satisfied expression. She sighed softly and said, yes, the crown prince is so peerless and has an outstanding status. How could people not yearn for him? With my lowly status, I don't dare to dream of marrying him as his wife. But after that night with him, and yesterday, he stood up for me at the gate of the Duke's estate and protected my safety. I have no regrets in this life. She didn't lie about what kind of night it was. Whether it was a chance encounter while digging a grave or under the moonlight, it was all Qi Zhuanyu's blind guess. In any case, it was enough to anger her to death. Qi Zhuanyu's face turned white. Her eyes widened and she flew into a rage. This must be nonsense. You shut up immediately. I don't believe anything. I'm telling you, you can't dream of touching the crown prince in this life. I won't allow it. I won't allow it. Ningshu said indifferently, if you don't allow it, what does it have to do with me? In any case, my relationship with the crown prince isn't something you can shake with just a few words. There was no messy relationship, only a life and death alliance relationship. Naturally, it couldn't be shaken. Qi Zhuanyu was so angry that she stomped her feet. She couldn't care less about her ladylike demeanor and almost slipped. Successfully teasing her into an angry little hen, Ningshu almost couldn't hold back her laughter. She decided to add one last strong medicine. Ningshu leaned close to her ear and playfully winked at her. Her charm was natural. Oh, by the way, I forgot to tell you that the crown prince has a very cute birthmark on his right shoulder. Plop, Qi Zhuanyu completely fainted. The maidservants beside her quickly helped her up and carried her into the Yun residence to find a doctor to treat her. Seeing them leave, Ningshu covered her mouth with a handkerchief and laughed. This child looked fierce, but she didn't expect that she couldn't be teased. She wasn't too annoying. But soon, she couldn't laugh anymore. Because a carriage slowly came from the shadow of the corner and stopped in front of her. Hui Mo, who was driving the carriage, looked at her quietly with a complicated expression. Chapter 37. She had just made up a rumor about him and was caught in the blink of an eye. What kind of luck was this? No wonder people said that if you walked too much at night, you would always bump into ghosts. Hui Mo looked at her with a complicated expression and said with difficulty, "It turns out that you have already." Ningshu was stunned for a moment before she reacted. Others did not know that she was just casually making up a story to teach Qi Zhaoyu a lesson. They only felt that she had analyzed her true feelings and wholeheartedly. She had long been deeply in love with Xiahou Qing. She subconsciously looked behind the curtain and asked, "Your Highness?" Hui Mo nodded at her sympathetically, which made her hope completely shattered. "Lady Ning, you don't have to feel embarrassed. There are too many women who admire my master. In the past, in Yunyang province, there was a line at the gate of the prince's mansion every day. In the capital, it is almost the same. You don't have to feel inferior, although, Hui Mo was very kind and wanted to comfort her, but this kind of kindness simply gave Ningshu a headache. She silently looked inside the carriage. It was so quiet that she could almost hear Xiahou Qing's breathing inside. It was shallow and even, but it was impossible to ignore. In the past, she'd taken liberties with King Chu Jiang countless times in the netherworld, but taking liberties in front of him was different from confessing her feelings behind his back. This feeling of secretly admiring him but not daring to confess it in front of his face and only daring to confess it behind his back was especially shameful. The most shameful thing was that it was heard by the person involved. No matter how thick-skinned Ningshu was, at this moment, she couldn't help but blush. Fortunately, Xiahou Qing couldn't see her embarrassment at this time. She rubbed the tip of her nose and walked to the front of the carriage shamelessly. She bowed and said, "My daughter spoke recklessly just now and offended Your Highness. Your Highness, please don't take offense. My daughter is serious." Before she finished her words, a white hand reached out from the carriage and interrupted her. His voice was still so indifferent that she couldn't hear his emotions. "Take it." He slowly opened his palm, revealing a small sachet with a blossoming peach blossom embroidered on it. It was the sachet that Ning Shu had dropped when she was riding his carriage to Chasing Clouds and Chasing Moon Pavilion. Xiaoho Qing paused for a moment when he felt 3 soft fingers taking the sachet away from his palm. He took back his hand and said to Hui Mo, "Let's go." Hui Mo showed her a pitiful expression and waved his whip to drive the carriage away. Behind him, Ning Shu looked at the sachet in her palm, her mind a complete mess. In the end, she let out a long sigh. Forget it, forget it. In any case, he already knew of the heavenly fox star's reputation as a loose woman. Let him think whatever he wants. Being thick-skinned was sometimes a good advantage. Without Qi Juanyu's obstruction, Ning Shu finally stepped into the Yun residence smoothly. She saw Madame Yun and Cloud Leaf lying on the sickbed. Yun Furen personally stood guard by Yun Fei's side. It could be seen that she had stayed up for more than one night as her eyes were already red. When the servants asked her to rest, she refused. She took a hot handkerchief and carefully wiped Yun Fei's face and hands, hoping to wipe a layer of blood from his face that was as white as paper. However, she found that no matter how hot the water was, it was useless. Very quickly, that layer of blood was blown away by the night wind, becoming even whiter. Madame Yun, who had been tough for decades, trembled with her fingers. Finally, she couldn't help but cover her face and squeeze out a suppressed cry from her throat. Ning Shu remembered that in her previous life, her family was sentenced to be beheaded. Originally, after her father was beheaded, it was her and Ji Er's turn to be beheaded. Her mother shouted loudly, wanting to be beheaded before her children. After giving birth to her and Ji Er, her mother, who had been weak and sick and looked like she would fall if the wind blew, smiled at her with blood on the corner of her mouth and said, "Shu Er, don't be afraid. Your father and I will go first. We will pave the way for you in the underworld and then come to welcome you." By the time Xiao Yuni rushed over with the imperial edict, her mother's head had already been separated from her body, thousands of love and thousands of sufferings, but no one loved a child more than a mother. Chapter 38. Being sentimental at this moment would not help Cloud Leaf. Instead, it would make things worse. Ning Shu blinked away the jealousy in her eyes and walked to the woodshed where Cloud Leaf's personal servant was locked up. The Yun family was a special family in the capital. Imperial Censor Yun's reputation for being incorruptible was well known in the capital for being henpecked. Ever since he got married over 20 years ago, Imperial Censor Yun had never dared to look at other women. Not to mention concubines, even a hen would need Madame Yun's permission to enter the Yun residence. Therefore, the Yun family had never had any filthy affairs of internal strife. Cloud Leaf himself had always stood aloof from worldly affairs and had never offended anyone. It was said that there must be a cause for everything. However, the biggest problem with this case was that they could not find a single suspect after all the investigations. In the end, only the female ghost could be explained. It was truly laughable. Forsythia followed behind Ning Shu. As she walked, she asked, "Miss, this case is too uncertain. There isn't even a suspect. How can we continue investigating?" Ning Shu shook her head. "I don't believe that there is a watertight wooden barrel in this world. Even if it is made of iron, water will slowly seep out from the gaps. There must be a flaw in this case in an inconspicuous corner." Lian Qiao frowned. But the Supreme Court and Jingji Province have questioned everyone. Even Imperial Censor Yun himself had brought people to search the entire residence of Yun. Anyone who had come into contact with young Master Yun in the past month, even the old man in the breakfast shop, was not spared. None of them could find any problems. Ning Shu was calm. "It's simple. Someone is not telling the truth." Forsythia was shocked. "This matter has already been reported to the heavens. If they are still not telling the truth, do they not want their lives anymore? Perhaps, it's because there are some things that are more important than one's life." The woodshed's iron lock was opened and a choking smell wafted out. Ning Shu was not the least bit squeamish as she walked in. In the corner of the woodshed, 2 people were tied up. They were Cloudleaf's personal servants, Peasant and Debate Day. These two had always accompanied Cloudleaf since she was young. No matter what Cloudleaf ate or where she went, these two would always accompany her. However, under the watchful eyes of these two people, the Cloudleaf still got into trouble. The two of them could not absolve themselves from the blame. In a fit of anger, Madame Yoon imprisoned the two of them. She threatened that if anything happened to Cloudleaf, she would allow them to die with her. In just a few short days, the two of them had been working so hard that they had dark circles under their eyes and their faces were pale. They felt as if the gates of hell had already been opened to them and welcomed them with open arms. Forsythia brought a chair for Ning Shu to sit in front of them. Lowering her head to look at the two people who were paralyzed on the ground, Ning Shu's expression was very amiable. In the afternoon, I asked the two of you to recall if your young master had any disputes, conflicts, or physical altercations with anyone. Can you recall anything now? The two of them raised their heads and raised their heads. The two of them raised their heads, their eyes filled with despair as they said in a daze, "Our young master's temper is the best, he is happy all day long, he likes to recite poems, he doesn't touch mahjong dice, he doesn't enter brothels or gambling dens, at most he would attend a poetry gathering every 10 days. In the entire capital, who doesn't praise our young master for being clean and honest, his natural disposition is pure and kind. Even if we cracked our skulls, we couldn't think of anyone who would harm him." As the two of them spoke, a few lines of tears fell down. Ning Shu continued to guide them patiently. Perhaps he encountered something strange or met some strange person that made you feel slightly surprised and left some impression. The two of them thought for a long time before shaking their heads again. Ning Shu asked a few similar questions to guide them, but there were no results. Looking at the two people who were huddled in the corner like lifeless pieces of wood, waiting for death, Ning Shu sighed in her heart and suddenly asked, "What did he use to threaten you?" The two people's ashen faces suddenly twitched. Chapter 39. The two of them were startled by Ning Shu's words and subconsciously wanted to deny it, but they were interrupted by her outstretched hand. "Your lives." In the dark woodshed, there was only the begonia lamp in Forsythia's hand. The warm orange light shone on Ning Shu's body. She was as beautiful as a fairy, but her eyes were like two balls of black mercury immersed in water. She could easily see through their hearts. "No, Madame Yoon has already ordered you to die. Since you're not afraid, it shouldn't be this." "Then what is it?" As she spoke, she scrutinized their expressions and slowly shook her head. "Oh, it's the lives of your entire family." When her voice fell, the two people who were like wooden puppets waiting for death revealed extremely panicked expressions. It proved that she had guessed correctly. With a plan in mind, Ning Shu continued, "Let me continue to guess. The first wave of people to interrogate you was from the Jingji government, so it was Lord Wei who warned you. If you dare to open your mouth, your entire family will die." From the two people's terrified and suffocated expressions, she knew that she had guessed correctly again. Ning Shu looked at them with pity. "You only know that you want to save your family's lives, but you don't know that sometimes, compared to death, living is more painful. Although I'm just a harem's daughter, I've heard of some punishments that are worse than death. I'll use one of them, burning, as an example. In your impression, burning is nothing more than roasting a person to death. Although it hurts a little, as long as you don't implicate your family, you'll die. It's a clean death. The new and improved version is many times more cruel. While roasting you on a fire, your family will watch from the side and smell the aroma of your roasted meat. Then, they will use a knife used to cut mutton, which must be extremely sharp, to cut off your roasted meat piece by piece and feed it to your family. As they eat, they will also have to listen to your screams. When they're full, we'll send them home safely." Her voice was neither arrogant nor impatient, neither fast nor slow. It was as pleasant as jade, but it made the two people drenched in sweat. They were more terrified than if their entire family had died. This kind of punishment, Imperial Censor Yoon knows many times more details than I do. I asked you again today because I wanted to give you a chance, but it seems that I can't help you. Ning Shu sighed regretfully and got up, unwilling to waste any more time on them. "Forsythia, let's go." The warm orange light was withdrawn from the woodshed. An invisible knife for shaving mutton was set up behind the darkness, forcibly prying open the two tightly shut clamshells. Lady Ning, we've already told you. We said it. The two of them, who had been silent all this time, finally couldn't help but reveal everything. Half a month ago, young master lost 4 hours. The embroidered shoes, which were about to step over the threshold, finally stopped. Ning Shu turned her head, and her eyes flashed. Lost? Actually, it's not that bad. Ning Shu asked, where did it happen? On a pleasure boat in the moon-seizing lake, moon-embracing lake, pleasure boat. These two words spun around in her heart and Ning Shu faintly had an impression. She slowly said, is it because of the new Lady Chiu who came to the moon-seizing lake a few months ago? Since they had already decided to speak, there was no need to hide it anymore. The two of them smacked their dry lips, looked at each other, and decided to talk about it later. 3 months ago, a new Lady Chiu came to the pleasure boat in the moon-seizing lake in the west of the city. Her name was Niinu. It was rumored that her voice was like pearls and jade, ethereal and pleasant to the ear. Anyone who heard it would be intoxicated, only feeling that the Sanskrit of the immortal realm was nothing more than this. Moreover, that Lady Chiu had integrity, she only sold her skills and not her body. Other than that, she also had a peculiar point, which was that she always covered her face with a light veil. She once said that unless the heavenly power descended, she would only invite the other party to take off her veil. Otherwise, even if they had 10,000 taels of gold, they wouldn't be able to take half a step into her pleasure boat. Therefore, the scholars in the capital all supported her. Young Master's Poetry Club was even more so. Everyone wanted to board her pleasure boat, to prove that their literary talent was better than others. Although Ning Shu had never seen it, she had heard of it. It was said that Lady Chiu was in the limelight for a period of time. Even the #1 star of the capital, Little Hong Yang, was suppressed by her, causing a lot of unhappiness. On the side, Forsythia unhappily frowned when she heard this. So, your family's young master went to see that Lady Chiu? Note 1. Lady Chiu, another name for female singers in the ancient times. In Bai Juyi's Peeper song, it was written that Lady Chiu was jealous of Lady Chiu. Chapter 40. Chuhi hurriedly said, Lady Ning, please don't misunderstand. My family's young master is sincere towards you and has no interest in that Chiu Niang. Beside him, Bienri nodded vigorously and continued, the cause of the matter is this. Our young master's good friend in the Poetry Society, the Jiang family's 4th young master, had a conflict with the Sun family's 2nd young master for some unknown reason. The two argued and almost used violence, so they made a bet. Whoever can win the favor of Niinu and see her true appearance first, the other person will be willing to be humiliated by Han Xin. However, the Jiang family's 4th young master failed several times and then came to beg my family's young master. At that time, my family's young master was busy preparing for his wedding with you. He was busy every day and didn't want to meddle in this matter. However, many years ago, my family's lord was almost convicted because of his words. Fortunately, Lord Jiang spoke up and helped my family to escape this calamity. Because of his previous kindness and friendship, my family's young master couldn't resist the Jiang family's 4th young master's pleas and agreed. That night, the moon-embracing lake was bustling with noise and excitement. Nearly 100 scholars gathered to compete. Niinu came up with 3 questions in a row and my family's young master came out on top. Niinu announced on the spot that she wanted to invite my family's young master to meet her on the pleasure boat. Everyone was envious, but they couldn't help but admit defeat. Thus, my family's young master brought the Jiang family's 4th young master onto the pleasure boat. We waited by the lake and then heard Miss Niinu's moving singing voice. She was as graceful as a fairy and was indeed extraordinary. The two of them vaguely recalled the beautiful scene and felt that it would be great if they could stay at that moment. Gossip was a refreshing medicine. Ning Shu listened with great interest, and then we waited by the shore for a long time, but our young master didn't come ashore. However, our young master clearly said that he would return shortly before boarding the boat. Thus, we asked the pleasure boat for him. The servant on the pleasure boat said that our young master had already come ashore on the other side of the lake. When we heard this, we became anxious and hurriedly searched. However, we couldn't find any trace of our young master. Even the Jiang family's fourth young master was nowhere to be seen. We searched for nearly 4 hours and almost went crazy. We almost went to report it to the authorities. In the end, we found our young master under a peach blossom tree on a small hill not far away. At that time, I found it strange. I had clearly searched around the peach blossom tree a few times, but I couldn't find it. Why did I only find it after searching so many times? Later on, when I thought about it, perhaps young master ran around after getting drunk and got lost with me. Ning Shu asked, after your young master was found, did he say anything? Peasant shook his head and said, young master was drunk and couldn't recognize anyone. He looked at me and said nonsense about himself. I thought it was fortunate that I was able to find young master, so I carried young master back to the residence. Forsythia interrupted, if that's the case, why is Lord Wei threatening the two of you? Finally, he reached the most terrifying part of the story. Peasant held his dizzy head and mumbled, because when young master woke up, he found that he had an additional jade pendant. Ning Shu asked, what kind of jade pendant? Carved on the back is a jade token with an azure sparrow. Forsythia didn't know what was so special about the cyan sparrow. How could a jade pendant scare these people like that? But Ning Shu knew it like the back of her hand. Because this azure sparrow was the emblem of the Empress Cow's maternal family, Uncle Cow's family. Peasant's tears rolled down his cheeks. We don't know what happened. After young master regained consciousness, he couldn't remember clearly. Besides a tear in his clothes, there was nothing else, so we didn't take it to heart. The jade pendant was originally on young master's table, but it disappeared without a trace. We really didn't think much of it at that time. Who knew that young master would become like that? They also didn't understand. It was such a small matter at that time, so how did it escalate to such a state? They were still in a daze after being threatened by the official yesterday. But what could they do? Sometimes, everything was just fate. Ning Shu finally understood. No wonder yesterday at the entrance of the Duke Public House, Shen Ziqing didn't even care about the reputation he had accumulated over 20 years of handling cases. He just wanted to convict her based on a few flawed pieces of evidence. Whether it was to offend the high and mighty Empress or to offend the little Ning Shu, the latter was definitely more worth it. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.